Part 4. The Struggle for Power. A pothole in the gravel road jolted the jeep and woke me up. I looked at my watch. 3 p.m. As I stretched and attempted to fully awaken, I felt a sharp pain in the small of my back. The drive had been grueling. After leaving Vicente, we had travelled the entire day, riding in several different directions as though Will were looking for something he couldn't find. We had spent the night at a small inn where the beds were hard and clumsy, and I had slept little. Now, after travelling hard for the second day in a row, I was ready to complain. I looked over at Will. He was focused on the road and so intent and alert that I decided not to interrupt him. He seemed to be in the same serious mood he had displayed several hours ago when he had stopped the jeep and told me we needed to talk. Do you remember that? I told you the insight had to be discovered one at a time, he asked. Yes. Do you believe that each will indeed present itself? Well, they have so far, I said half humorously. Will looked at me with a serious expression. Finding the third insight was easy. All we had to do was visit Vicente. But from now on, running across the other insight may be much more difficult. He paused for a moment, then said, I think that we should go south to a small village near Keilabanga, a place called Kula. There is another virgin forest up there that I think you should see, but it is vitally important that you stay alert. Coincidences will occur regularly, but you have to notice them. Do you understand? I told him I thought I did and that I would keep what he said in mind. After that, the conversation had lapsed and I had fallen into deep sleep, a sleep I now regretted because of what it had done to my back. I stretched again and Will looked over at me. Where are we? I asked. In the Andes again, he said. The hill had turned into high ridges and distant valleys. The vegetation was coarser now, the trees smaller and wild blown. Inhaling deeply, I noticed the air was thinner and cool. Better put on this jacket, Will said, pulling a brown cotton windbreaker from a bag. It will be cold up here this afternoon. Ahead, as the road rounded a bend, we could see a narrow crossroad on one side near a white frame store and a gas station. A vehicle was parked with the hood open. Tools lay on a cloth covering the fender. As we drove past, a blond man walked out of the store and glanced at us briefly. He was round-faced and wore dark rimmed glasses. I looked at the man closely, my mind racing back 5 years. I know it wasn't him, I said to Will. But that guy looks just like a friend of mine I used to work with. I haven't thought of him in years. I noticed Will was scrutinizing me. I told you to watch events closely, he said. Let us go back and see it. What fellow needs some help. He didn't look like a local. We found a place where the shoulders of the road were wide enough and turned round. When we returned to the store, the man was working on the engine. Will pulled up to the pump and leaned out the window. Look like you have trouble, Will said. The man pushed his glasses back upon his nose, a habit my friend also shared. Yes, he replied. I have lost my water pump. The man appeared to be in his early 40s and was of a slight build. His English was formal with a French accent. Bill was quickly out of the vehicle, introducing us. The man offered me his hand with a smile that also looked familiar. His name was Chris Renaud. You sound French, I said. I am, he replied, but I teach psychology in Brazil. I am here in Peru seeking information about an archaeological artifact that has been found, a manuscript. Hesitated for a moment, unsure how much I should trust him. We are here for the same reason, I finally said. He looked at me with a deep interest. What can you tell me about it? He asked. Have you seen copies? Before I could reply, Bill walked out to the building, the screen door slamming behind him. Great luck, he said to me. The owner has a place where we can camp and there is some hot food. We might as well stay for the night. He turned and looked expectantly at Renaud. If you don't mind sharing your reservations. No, he said. I welcome the company. A new pump cannot be delivered here until tomorrow morning. While he and Will began a conversation about the mechanics and reliability of Renault's Land Cruiser, I leaned back against the jeep, feeling the warmth of the sun and drifting into a pleasant reverie about the old friend Renaud had brought to mind. My friend had been wide-eyed and curious, very much like Renaud seemed, and a constant reader of books. I could almost recall the theories he liked, but time had obscured by recollection. Let us get our step down to the campsite, Will was saying, patting me on the back. Okay, I said absently. He opened the rear door and pulled out the tent and sleeping bag and loaded my arms. Then grabbed a duffel bag full of extra clothing. Renaud was locking up his vehicle. We all walked past the store and down a course of steps. The ridge fell away steeply behind the building and we angled to the left along the narrow pathway. After 20 or 30 yards, we could hear water running, and further on, we saw a stream cascading down the rocks. The air was cooler and I could smell the strong fragrance of mint. Directly in front of us, the ground leveled out and the stream formed a pool about 25 feet in diameter. Someone had cleared a campsite and built a rock containment for a fire. Wood was stacked against a nearby tree. This is fine, Will said, and began unpacking his large foreman tent. Renaud spread his smaller tent to the right of Will. Are you and Will researchers? Renaud asked me at one point. Will had finished with the tent and had walked up to check on dinner. Wilson's guide, I said. I am not doing much of anything right now. Renaud gave me a puzzled look. I smiled and asked, have you been able to see any part of the manuscript? I have seen the first and second inside, he said, stepping closer. And I will tell you something. I think it is all happening just as the manuscript says. We are changing our worldview. I can see it in psychology. What do you mean? He took a breath. My field is conflict, looking at why humans treat each other so violently. I have always known that this violence comes from the urge humans feel to control and dominate one another, but only recently have we studied this phenomenon from the inside, from the point of view of the individual's consciousness. We have asked what happened inside a human being that makes him want to control someone else. We have found that When an individual walks up to another person and engages in a conversation, which happens billions of times each day in the world, one of two things can happen. That individual can come away feeling strong or feeling weak, depending on what occurs in the interaction. I gave him a puzzled look, and he appeared slightly embarrassed at having rushed into a long lecture on the subject. I asked him to go on. For this reason, he added, we humans always seem to take a manipulative posture, no matter that the particular of situation or the subject matter. We prepare ourselves to say whether we must in order to prevail in the conversation. Each of us seeks to find some way to control and thus to remain on top in the encounter. If we are successful, if our viewpoint prevails, when rather than feel weak, we receive a psychological boost. In other words, we humans seek to outwit and control each other, not just because of some tangible goal in the outside world that we are trying to achieve, but because of a lift we get psychologically. This is the reason we see so many irrational conflicts in the world, both at the individual level and at the level of nations. The consensus in my field is that this whole matter is now emerged into public consciousness. We humans are realizing how much we manipulate each other, and consequently we are reevaluating our motivations. We are looking for another way to interact. I think this re-evolution will be part of the new world view that the manuscript speaks of. Our conversation was interrupted as Will walked up. They are ready to serve us, he said. We hurried up the path and into the basement level of the building, the family's living quarters. We walked through the living room and into the dining area. On the table was a hot meal of stew, vegetables and salad. Sit down, the proprietor was saying in English, pulling out chairs and rushing about. Behind him stood an older woman, apparently his wife, and a teenage girl of about 15. While taking his seat, Will accidentally brushed his fork with an arm. He fell noisily to the floor. The man glared at the woman, who in turn spoke harshly to the young girl, who had not yet moved to bring a new one. She hurried into the other room and returned holding a fork, then handed it tentatively to Will. Her back was stooped and her hand shook slightly. My eyes met Renault's from across the table. Enjoy the food, the man said, handing me one of the dishes. For most of the meal, Renault and Will talked casually about academic life, the challenges of teaching and publishing. The proprietor had left the room, but the woman stood just inside the door. As the woman and her daughter began serving individual dishes of pie, the young girl's elbow hit my water glass, splitting the water on the table in front of me. The older woman rushed over in a rage, shouting at the girl in Spanish and pushing her out of the way. I am very sorry, the woman said, wiping up the water. The girl is so clumsy. The young girl exploded, flinging the remaining pie at the woman, missing and splattering pie and broken china across the middle of the table. Just as the proprietor returned, the old man shouted and the girl ran from the room. I am sorry, he said, hurrying to the table. It is no problem, I replied. Don't be so hard on the girl. Will was on his feet, figuring the bill, and we quickly left. Renault had been quiet, but as we walked through the door and down the step, he spoke. Did you see that girl? He asked, looking at me. She is a classic example of psychological violence. This is what the human need to control others leads to when taken to the extreme. The old men and women are dominating the girl totally. Did you see how nervous and stooped she was? Yes, I said, but it appears she is about fed up. Exactly, her parents have never let up, and from her point of view, she has no choice but to lash out violently. It is the only way she can gain some control for herself. Unfortunately, when she grows up, because of this early trauma, she will think she has to seize control and dominate others with the same intensity. These characteristics will be deeply ingrained and will make her just as dominating as her parents are now, especially when she is around people who are vulnerable, such as children. In fact, this same trauma no doubt happened to her parents before her. They have to dominate now because of the way their parents dominated them. That is, she means, through which psychological violence is passed down from one generation to another. Renault stopped suddenly. I need to get my sleeping bag out of the truck, he said. I will be down in a second. I nodded and Will and continued toward the campsite. You and Renault have been talking a lot, Will remarked. Yes, we have, I said. He smiled. Actually, Renault has been doing most of the talking. You listen and answer direct question, but you don't offer much. I am interested in what he has to say, I said defensively. Will ignored my tone. Did you see the energy moving between the members of that family? The man and woman were sucking children's energy into themselves until she was almost dead. I forgot to watch the energy flow, I said. Well, don't you think Renault would like to see it? What do you make of running into his in the first place? I don't know. Don't you think it has some meaning? We were driving down the road and see you someone who reminds you of an old friend, and when we met him, he happened to also be looking for the manuscript. Doesn't that sound beyond coincidence? Yes, perhaps you met so that you could receive some information that will extend your journey here. And doesn't it follow that perhaps you have some information for him as well? Yes, I guess so. What do you think I should tell him? Will again looked at me with his characteristic warmth. The truth, he said. Before I could say anything else, Renault came bounding down the path toward us. I brought a flashlight in case we need it later, he said. For the first time, I became aware of the delight and looked west. The sun had already set, but the sky was still a bright orange. The few clouds in that direction carried a darker reddish color. For an instant, I thought I saw a whitish field of light around the plants in the foreground, but the image faded. Beautiful sunset, I said, then noticed Will had disappeared into his tent and Renault was pulling his sleeping bag from its case. Yes, it is, Renault said distractedly, without looking. I walked over to where he was working. He looked up and said, I didn't get to ask you. What insight have you seen? The first two were only described to me, I replied, but we just spent the last 2 days at the Vicente Lodge near Satipo. While we were there, one of the people doing research gave me a copy of the third insight. It is pretty amazing. His eyes lit up. Do you have it with you? Yes. Do you want to look at it? He jumped at the opportunity and took it into his tent to read. I found some matches and old newspaper and started to fire. After it was burning brightly, Will crawled out of his tent. Where is Renault? I asked. He is reading the translation Sarah gave me, I said. Will walked over and sat on a smooth log someone had placed near the fire area. I joined him. Darkness had finally descended and nothing could be seen except for the bare outline of the trees to our left. The dim light from the station behind us and a muted glow from Renault's tent. The woods were alive with light sounds, some of which I had never heard before. After about 30 minutes, Renault emerged from his tent, the flashlight in his hand. He walked over and sat at my left. Will was yawning. That insight is amazing, he said. Could anyone there actually see those energy fields? I briefly told him of my experiences, beginning with our arrival and proceeding through the point where I actually saw fields myself. He was silent for a minute. Then he asked, they were actually doing experiments where they projected their own energy into plants and affected the plant's growth. It affected their nutritional potency too, I said. But the main insight is broader than that, he commented, almost to himself. The third insight is that the universe on the whole is made up of this energy, and we can affect perhaps not only plants but other things as well, just by what we do with the energy that belongs to us, the part we can control. He paused for a full minute. I wonder how we affect other people with our energy. Will looked at me and smiled. I will tell you what I saw, I said. I witnessed an argument between two people and their energies were doing really strange things. Renew pushed up his glasses again. Tell me about that. Will stood up at this point. I think I need to turn in, he said. It has been a long day. We both said good night and Will entered his tent. Afterward, I described as best I could what Sarah and the other scientists had said to each other, emphasizing the action of their energy fields. Now, wait a minute, Renew said. You saw their energies pulling at each other, trying to, say, capture each other as they argued? That is right, I said. He was thoughtful for a few seconds. We must analyze this fully. We had two people arguing over who had the correct view of the situation, over who was right, each seeking to win out over the other, even to the point of invalidating the other's confidence and to outright name calling. Suddenly, we looked up. Yes, this all makes sense. What do you mean? I said. The movement of this energy, if we can systematically observe it, is a way to understand what humans are receiving when we compete and argue and harm each other. When we control another human being, we receive their energy. We fill up at the other's expense, and the filling up is that motivates us. Look, I must learn how to see these energy fields. Where is this Vicent Lodge? How do I get there? I told him the general location, but said he would have to ask Will for specific directions. Yes, I will do that tomorrow, he said with commitment. For now, I should get some sleep. I want to leave as early as possible. He said good night, then disappeared into his tent, leaving me alone with the crackling fire and the night sounds. When I awoke, Will was already out of the tent. I could smell the aroma of hot cereal. I slipped out of my sleeping bag and looked out through the tent flap. Will was holding a pan over the fire. Renew was nowhere to be seen, and his tent was gone. Where is Renew? I asked, climbing out and walking over the fire. He is already packed up, Will said. He is up there working on his truck, getting ready, so he can leave as soon as his part comes in. Will handed me a bowl of oatmeal and we sat on one of the logs to eat. Did you two stay up late talking? Will asked. Not really, I said. I told him all I knew. Just then, we heard sound from the path. Renew was hurriedly walking down to us. I am all prepared, he said. I must say goodbye. After several minutes of conversation, Renu walked back up the step and left. Will and I took turn bathing and shaving in the station owner's bathroom. When we packed our gear, filled the vehicle with gas and departed, heading north. How far is Kula? I asked. We should be there before nightfall if we are lucky, he said, then added, so, what did you learn from Renu? I looked closely at him. He seemed to be looking for a specific answer. I don't know, I said. What conception did Renu leave you with? That we humans, although we are conscious of it, have the tendency to control and dominate others. We want to win the energy that exists between people. It builds us up somehow, makes us feel better. Will was looking straight ahead at the road. He looked as if he was suddenly thinking of something else. Why do you ask? I inquired. Is this the fourth sight? He looked at me. Not quite. You have been the energy flow between people, but I am not sure you know how it feels when it happens to you. Then tell me how it feels, I said, growing exasperated. You accuse me of not talking. Getting information out of you is like pulling teeth. I have been trying for days to find out more about your past experiences with the manuscript, and all you do is put me off. He laughed, then shot me a smile. We had a deal. Remember, I have a reason for being secretive. One of the insight concerns how to interrupt the event of one's past life. It is a process of become clear about who you are, what you are here on this planet to do. I want to wait until we reach the insight before we discuss my background, okay? I smiled at his adventurous tone. Yeah, I guess. For the remainder of the morning, we rode the silence. The day was sunny and the sky blue. Occasionally, as we proceeded higher into the mountains, thick clouds would float across our path, covering the windshield with moisture. Around noon, we pulled over at an overlook that afforded a spectacular view of the mountain and valleys to the east. Are you hungry? Will asked. I nodded and he pulled two carefully wrapped sandwiches from a bag on the back seat. After he handed me one of them, he asked, what do you think about this view? It is beautiful. He smiled slightly and stared at me, giving me the impression that he was observing my energy field. What are you doing? I asked. Just looking, he said. Mountain peaks are special places that can build energy in whomever sit on them. You look as though you have an affinity for mountain overlooks. I told Will of my grandfather's valley and of the ridge overlooking the lake and how it had made me feel alert and energized the same day Charlene had arrived. Perhaps growing up there, he said, prepared you for something here now. I was about to ask him more about the energy that mountain provided when he added, when a virgin forest is on a mountain, the energy is amplified even more. Is the virgin forest we are headed for on a mountain? I asked. Look for yourself, he said. You can see it. He pointed toward the east. Miles away, I could see two ridges which ran parallel to each other for what looks like several miles. Then they converged, forming a V shape. In the space between the two ridges lay what looked like a small town, and at the vertex, the point where the two ridges met, the mountain rose sharply and butted off into a rocky summit. The summit appeared slightly higher than the ridge we were on, and the area around its base seemed much greener as though covered with lush foliage. That area of green? I asked. Yes, Will said. It is like Vicent, yet more powerful and special. How is it special? It facilitates one of the other insights. How? I asked. He started the jeep and pulled back onto the road. I am betting, he said, that you will find out. Neither of us said much more for an hour or so. Then I drifted off to sleep. Sometime later, Will was shaking my arm. Wake up, he said. We are coming into Kula. I sat up in the seat. Ahead of us, in a valley where two roads came together, was a small town. On both sides were the two ridges we had seen. The trees on the ridges seemed as large as though at Vicent and spectacularly green. I want to tell you something before we drive in there, he said. In spite of the energy of this forest, this town is a lot less civilized than other areas of Peru. It is known as a place to get information about the manuscript. But the last time I was here, it was full of greedy types who didn't feel the energy and didn't understand the insight. They merely wanted the money or recognition they might get by discovered in the ninth. I looked at the village. It consisted of 4 or 5 streets and avenues. Larger frame buildings lined the two main roads that crossed in the center of the town. But the other streets were little more than alleyway, lined by small dwellings. Parked at the crossroad were perhaps a dozen of the road vehicles and trucks. Why are all these people here? I asked. He smiled daringly. Because it is one of the last place to get gas and supplies before going deeper into the mountains. He started the jeep and drove slowly into town, then stopped in front of one of the larger buildings. I couldn't read the Spanish signs, but from the product in the window, I presumed it was a grocery and hardware. Wait here for a minute, he said. I want to go in for a few things. I nodded and Will disappeared inside. As I looked around, a truck pulled up across the street and several people got out. One was a dark-haired woman in a fatigue jacket. To any amazement, I realized it was Marjorie. She and a young man in his early 20s crossed the street and walked right in front of me. I opened my door and got out. Marjorie, I yelled. She stopped and looked around, then saw me and smiled. Hello, she said. As she began to walk toward me, the young man grabbed her arm. Robert told us not to talk with anyone, he said very softly, trying not to let me overhear. It is okay, she said. I know this person. Go on in. He looked at me skeptically, then backed away and went into the store. I tried then, in a stuttering way, to explain what had happened between us at the gardens. She laughed and told me Sarah had related everything to her. She was about to say something else when Will walked out with a handful of supplies. I introduced them, and we all talked for a few minutes as Will placed the supplies in the back of the jeep. I have an idea, Will said. Let us get something else to eat across the street. I looked over at what appeared to be a small cafe. Sounds good to me, I said. I don't know, Marjorie said. I need to leave soon. My ride. Where are you going? I asked. Back to the west, a couple of miles. I have come up to visit a group studying the manuscript. We can take you back later after dinner, Will commented. Well, I guess that will be okay. Will looked at me. I have one more thing to pick up. You two go ahead and order, and I will order something when I get there. I will only be a few minutes. We agreed, and Marjorie and I waited as several trucks passed. Bill walked down the street to the south. Suddenly the young man with whom Marjorie had arrived walking out of the store and confronted us again. "Where are you going?" he said, holding her arm. "This is a friend of mine," she replied. "We are going to eat, and then he can run me back later. Look, you can't trust anyone up here. You know, Robert wouldn't approve." "It is okay," she said. "I want you to come with me now." I took his arm and pulled it off Marjorie. "You heard what she told you," I said. He stepped back and looked at me, suddenly appearing very timid. He turned and walked back into the store. "Let us go," I said. We walked across the street and into a small dinner. The eating area consisted of one room and just 8 tables and was permeated with the smell of grease and smoke. I spotted an unoccupied table on the left. As we walked over, several people glanced up at us for an instant, then returned to what they were doing. The waitress spoke only Spanish, but Marjorie knew the language well and ordered for us both. Afterward, Marjorie looked at me warmly. I grinned at him. "Who is that guy you were with?" "That is Kenny," she said. "I don't know. What is wrong with him?" "Thanks for helping." She was looking directly into my eyes, and her comment made me feel wonderful. "How did you get connected with that group?" I asked. "Robert Jensen is an archaeologist. He is forming a group to study manuscript and to search for the ninth insight. He came by Vicente a few weeks back, then again a couple of days ago." "What?" I asked. "Well, I was in a relationship with Vicente that I wanted to get away from. Then I met Robert, and he was so charming, and what he was doing seemed too interesting. He convinced me that our research at the gardens would be enhanced by the ninth insight, and that he was on his way to find it. He said searching for this insight would be the most exciting thing he has ever done, and when he offered me a place on his team for a few months, I decided to accept." She paused again and looked down at the table. She appeared uncomfortable, so I changed the subject. "How many of the insight have you read?" "Only the one. I saw that Vicente. Robert has some others, but he believes people have to rid themselves of their traditional beliefs before they can understand them. He says he would rather they learn the key concept from him." I must have frowned because he added, "You don't like that much, do you?" "It sounds suspicious," I said. She looked at me intensely. Again, I wondered about it too. "Maybe when you take me back, you can talk with him and tell me what you think." The waitress arrived and brought 4 food, and as she was walking away, I saw Will come in the door. He walked quickly to our table. "I have got to meet some people about a mile north of here," he said. "I will be gone about 2 hours. Take the jeep and take Marjorie back. I am riding with someone else." He shot me a smile. "We can meet back here." The thought came to me to tell him about Robert Jensen, but I decided against it. "Okay," I said. He looked at Marjorie. "Nice to have met you. Wish I had time to stay and talk." She looked at him with her coy expression. "Maybe some other time." He nodded, handed me the key, and walked away. Marjorie ate for a few minutes, then said, "He seems like a man with a purpose. How did you meet him?" I told her in detail of my experiences upon first arriving in Peru. As I talked, she listened intently. "So, intently. In fact, that I found myself telling the story with great ease and expression, the dramatic turns and episodes with insight and true flair. She seemed spellbound, hanging on every word. Goodness, she said at one point, do you think you are in danger? No, I don't think so, I said. Not this far from Lima. She was still looking at me expectantly. So while we finished eating, I briefly summarized the events at Vicent up to the point where Sarah and I had arrived at the gardens. That is where I met you, I said, and you ran off. Oh, it wasn't like that, she said. I just didn't know you, and when I saw your feelings, I thought it was best to leave. Well, I apologize, I said, chuckling, for letting my energy get out of hand. She looked at her watch. I guess I should be getting back. They will be wondering about me. I left enough money for the bill and we walked outside to Will's jeep. The night was chilly and we could see a trace of our breath as we got in. She said, head back north on this road. I will tell you when to turn. I nodded and made a quick U-turn in the street and headed that way. Tell me more about this farm we are going to, I said. I think Robert runs it. Apparently his group has been using it for a long time, while he has studied the inside. Since I have been there, everyone has been assembling supplies and readying the vehicles, things like that. Some of his men seem very rough. Why did he invite you along? I asked. He said he wanted a person who could help interpret the last insight once we found it. At least that is what he said back at Vicent. Here he has only talked about supplies and helping to prepare for the trip. Where is he planning to go? I don't know, she replied. He never answered me when I asked. After about a mile and a half, she pointed out a turn to the left onto a narrow rocky road. It meandered upon a ridge and down into the flat valley. Ahead was a farmhouse made of rough planking. Behind it were several barns and outbuildings. 3 llamas peered at us from a fenced pasture as we slowed to a stop. Several people walked around a vehicle and stayed without smiling. I noticed a gas-powered electric generator humming at the side of the house. Then the door opened and a tall, dark-haired man with a strong, lean feature walked toward us. That is Robert, Marjorie said. Good, I said, still feeling strong and confident. We got out as Jensen walked up to us. He looked at Marjorie. I was worried about you, he said. I understand. You ran into a friend. I introduced myself and he shook my hand firmly. I am Robert Jensen, he said. Glad you two are all right. Come in. Inside, several people busied themselves with supplies. One carried a tent and camping gear toward the back. Through the dining room, I noticed 2 Peruvian women in the kitchen packing food. Jensen sat in one of the chairs in the living room and directed us to 2 others. Why did you say you were glad we were all right? I asked. He bent toward me and asked in a sincere tone, how long have you been in this area? Only since this afternoon. Then you couldn't know how dangerous it is here. People are disappearing. Have you heard of the manuscript of the missing 9th insight? Yes, I have. In fact, then you need to know what is going on. He interrupted. The search for the last insight is getting ugly. There are dangerous people involved in this. Who? I asked. People who don't care about the archaeological value of this discovery at all. People who just want the insight for their own purposes. A huge man with a beard and punch interrupted the conversation and showed Jensen a list. They discussed something briefly in Spanish. Jensen looked at me again. Are you here to find the missing insight too? He asked. Do you have any idea what you are getting into? I felt awkward and had difficulty expressing myself. Well, I am mainly interested in finding out more about the entire manuscript. I haven't seen that much of it yet. He straightened in his chair, then said, do you realize that the manuscript is a state artifact and that copies of it have been made illegal except by permit? Yes, but some scientists disagree with that. They feel the government is suppressing new. Don't you think the nation of Peru has the right to control its own archaeological treasures? Does the government know that you are in this country? I didn't know what to say. The urge of anxiety in my stomach was back. Look, don't get me wrong, he said, smiling. I am on your side. If you have some sort of academic support from outside the country, then tell me. But I get the feeling you are just floating around. Something like that, I said. I noticed Marjorie's focus and shifted from me to Jensen. What do you think he should do? She asked. Jensen stood up and smiled. I could perhaps work you into a position with us here. We need more people. Where we are going is relatively safe, I think, and you could find some avenues home along the way if things didn't work out. He looked at me closely. But you will have to be willing to do exactly as I say every step of the way. I glanced over at Marjorie. She was still looking at Jensen. I felt confused. Perhaps I should consider Jensen's offer, I thought. If he was in good standing with the government, then this might be the only opportunity I had for a legitimate way back to the States. Perhaps I had been fooling myself. Perhaps Jensen was right and I was in way over my head. I think you should consider that Robert is saying, Marjorie commented. It is too frightening out there alone. Though I know she might be correct. I still had faith in Will, in what were doing. I wanted to express this thought, but then I tried to speak. I found I couldn't formulate the words. I could no longer think clearly. Suddenly the large man walking into the room again and looking out the window. Jensen was quickly up and looking. Then he turned to Marjorie and in a casual tone said, someone is coming. Go ask Kenny to come up here, please. She nodded and left. Through the window I could see truck light approaching. The vehicle parked just outside the fence, 50 feet away. Jensen opened the door and as he did, I heard my name mentioned outside. Who is that? I asked. Jensen looked at me sharply. Be very quiet, he said. He and the large man walked outside and pulled the door closed. Through the window I could see a long figure silhouetted behind the truck's light. My first impulse was to stay inside. Jensen's assessment of my situation had filled me with foreboding. But something about the person by the truck seemed familiar. I opened the door and walked outside. As soon as Jensen saw me, he quickly turned and walked me away. What are you doing? Go back inside. Above the generator, I thought. I heard my name again. Go back inside now, Jensen said. It could be a trap. He was standing directly in front of me, blocking my view of the vehicle. Go back inside now. I felt totally confused and panicked, unable to make a decision. Then the figure behind the lights walked closer and then I could see his form around Jensen's body. Distractedly, I heard, come here, I need to talk with you. Then, as the figure approached, my head cleared and I realized that it was Will. I rushed past Jensen, What was wrong with you? Will asked quickly. We need to get out of here. But what about Marjorie? I asked. We can't do anything about her right now, Will said. We would better leave. We started to walk away. Then Jensen called out, You would better stay here. You won't make it. I glanced back. Will stopped and looked at me, giving me a choice to stay or go. Let us go, I said. We passed the truck in which Will had arrived, and I noticed two other men had been waiting in the front seat. When we got to Will's jeep, he asked me for the keys and we drove away. The truck with Will's friends followed. Will turned and looked at me. Jensen told me you had decided to stay with his crew. What was going on? How do you know his name? I stammered. I just heard all about this guy, Will replied. He works for the Peruvian government. He is a real archaeologist, but he is committed to keeping the whole thing secret in return for exclusive rights to study the manuscript. Only he wasn't supposed to go looking for the missing insight. Apparently, he is decided to violate that agreement. He is rumored to be leaving soon in pursuit of the ninth. When I learned he was the person Marjorie was with, I thought I would better get down here. What did he say to you? He told me I was in danger and that I should join up with him and that he would help me leave the country if that is what I wanted. Will shook his head. He really had you hooked. What do you mean? You should have seen your energy field. It was flowing almost totally into his. I don't understand. Think back to Sarah's argument with the scientist at Vicente. If you had witnessed one of them winning, convincing the other that he was correct, then you would have seen the loser's energy flowing into the winners, leaving the loser feeling drained and weak and somewhat confused. The way the girl in the Peruvian family appeared and the way he smiled. That you look now. You saw that happening to me? I asked. Yes, he replied, and it was extremely difficult for you to stop his control of you and to pull yourself away. I thought for a minute you weren't going to do it. Jesus, I said. That guy must really be evil. Not really, he said. He is probably only half aware of what he is doing. He thinks he is trying to control the situation, and no doubt he learned a long time ago that he could control successfully by following a certain strategy. He first pretends to be your friend, then he finds something wrong with that you are doing. In your case, that you were in danger. In effect, he subtly undermines your confidence in your own path until you begin to identify with him. As soon as that happens, he has you. Will looked directly at me. This is only one of many strategies people use to con others out of their energy. We will learn about the remaining ways later in the sixth insight. I wasn't listening. My thoughts were on Marjorie. I didn't like leaving her there. Do you think we should try to get Marjorie? I asked. Not now, he said. I don't think she is in any danger. We can drive out tomorrow as we leave and try to talk to her. We were silent for a few minutes. Then Will asked, Do you understand what said about Jensen not realizing what he was doing? He is no different from most people. He just does what makes him feel the strongest. No, I don't think I understand. Will looked thoughtful. All this is still unconscious in most people. All we know is that we feel weak, and when we control others, we feel better. What we don't realize is that this sense of feeling better costs the other person. It is their energy that we have stolen. Most people go through their lives in a constant hunt for someone else's energy. He looked at me with a twinkle in his eye, although occasionally it works differently. We meet someone who, at least for a little while, will voluntarily send us their energy. What are you getting at? Think back to when you and Marjorie were eating together at the restaurant in town and I walked in. Okay, I don't know what you two were talking about, but obviously her energy was pouring into you. When I walked in, I could see it clearly. Tell me, how did you feel during that time? I felt good, I said. In fact, the experiences and concepts I was relating seemed crystal clear to me. I could express myself easily. But what does that mean? He smiled. Occasionally, another person will voluntarily want us to define their situation for them, giving us their energy outright, the way Marjorie did with you. It makes us feel empowered, but you will see that this gift doesn't usually last. Most people, Marjorie included, aren't strong enough to keep giving energy. That is why most relationships eventually turn into power struggles. Humans link up energy and then fight over who is going to control it, and the loser always pays the price. He stopped abruptly and looked at me. Do you get fourth insight? Think about what was happened to you. You observed that energy flows between people and wondered what it meant, and then he ran into Renu. Who told you? That psychologists were already searching for some reason humans sought to control each other. All that was demonstrated with the Peruvian family. You saw clearly that dominating another makes the dominator feel powerful and knowledgeable, but it sucks the vital energy out of those who are being dominated. It makes no difference if we tell ourselves that we are doing it for the person's own good, or that they are our children and therefore we should be in control all the time. The damage still occurs. Next, you ran into Jensen and got the taste of what this actually feels like. You saw that when someone is dominating you psychically, they actually take your mind away. It was not as if you lost some intellectual debate with Jensen. You didn't have the energy or mental clarity to debate with. All your mental power was going to Jensen. Unfortunately, this kind of psychic violence happens all the time throughout human culture, often by otherwise well-meaning people. I just nodded. Will had summarized my experience exactly. Try to integrate the fourth insight fully. Will continued. See how it fits together with what you already know. The third insight showed you that the physical world is actually a vast system of energy, and now the fourth point out that for a long time we humans have been unconsciously competing for the only part of this energy we have been open to, the part that flows between people. This is what human conflict has always been about, at every level, from all the petty conflict in families and employment settings to wars between nations. It is a result of feeling insecure and weak and having to steal someone else's energy to feel okay. Wait a minute, I protested. Some wars had to be fought. They were right, of course, Will replied, but the only reason that their conflict can be immediately settled is that one side is holding on to an irrational position for energy purpose. Will appeared to remember something. Reaching into satchel, he pulled out a bundle of papers clipped together. I almost forgot, he said. I found a copy of the fourth insight. He handed me the copy and said nothing else, looking straight ahead as he drove. I picked up the small flashlight Will kept on the floorboard, and for the next 20 minutes read the short document, Understanding the Fourth Insight. It said it matter of seeing the human world as a vast competition for energy and thus for power. Yet, once humans understand their struggle, the insight continued, we would immediately begin to transcend this conflict. We would begin to break free from the competition over mere human energy because we would finally be able to receive our energy from another source. I looked at Will. What is the other source? I asked. He smiled but said nothing. Part 5. The Message of the Mystics. The next morning I awoke as soon as I heard Will stirring. I had spent the night at a house belonging to one of his friends, and Will was sitting up in a cot across the room, dressing quickly. It was still dark outside. Let us get packed, he whispered. We gathered our clothes and made several trips out to the jeep with some extra supplies Will had bought. The center of town was only a few hundred yards away, but a few lights penetrated the darkness. Dawn was but the streak of lighter sky toward the east. Other than a few birds signaling the impending morning, there were no sounds. When we finished, I stayed with the jeep while Will spoke briefly with his friend who stood sleepy on the porch while we completed our packing. Suddenly, we heard noise at the crossroad. We could see the lights of 3 trucks as they drove into the center of the town and stopped. That could be Jensen, Will said. Let us walk over there and see what they are doing, but carefully. We made our way across several streets and into an alley that entered the main road about 100 feet from the truck. 2 of the vehicles were being filled with fuel and the other was parked in front of the store. 4 or 5 people stood nearby. I saw Marjorie walk out of the store and place something in the truck there, then walked casually toward us, gazing into the adjacent shop. Walk over there and see if you can get her to come with us, Will whispered. I will wait for you here. I slipped around the corner and as I walked toward her, I was horrified. Behind her, in front of the store, I noticed for the first time that several of Jensen's men carried automatic weapons. A few moments later, my fright intensified. In the street across from me, armed soldiers crouched low and slowly approached Jensen's group. At the exact time Marjorie saw me, Jensen's men saw the others and scattered. A burst of machine gun fire filled the air. Marjorie looked at me with terror in her eyes. I rushed forward and grabbed her. We ducked into the next alley. More shots were being fired amid angry shouting in Spanish. We tripped over a pile of empty cartons and fell, our faces almost touching. Let us go, I said, jumping to my feet. She struggled up, then pulled me down again, nodding ahead to the end of the alley. 2 men with weapons were hiding with their back to us. Looking down the next street, we froze. Finally, the men raced across the street to the wooded area beyond. I know. We had to get back to the house of Wilson's friend, to the jeep. I was sure Will would go there. We crept carefully to the next street. Angry shouting and gunfire could be heard toward the right, but we could see no one. I looked left. Nothing there either. No sign of Will. I figured he had run ahead of us. Let us run across to the woods, I said to Marjorie, who was now alert and looking determined. Then I continued. We will stay along the edge of the woods and veer left. The jeep is parked in that direction. Okay, she said. We crossed the street quickly and made our way to within 100 feet or so of the house. The jeep was still there, but we could see no movement anywhere. As we prepared to dash across the last street to the house, A military vehicle turned a corner to our left and proceeded slowly toward the dwelling. Simultaneously, Will ran across the yard, started the jeep, and sped away in the opposite direction. The vehicle pursued. "Damn," I said. "What will we do now?" Marjorie asked, panic returning to her face. More shots were being fired in the streets behind us, closer this time. Ahead, the forest thickened and inclined up the ridge, which towered over the town and ran north and south. It was the same ridge that I had seen from the overlook earlier. "Let us get to the top," I said. "Hurry." We climbed several hundred yards up the ridge. At an overlook, we stopped and looked back toward the town. Military vehicles seemed to be pouring into the crossroad, and numerous soldiers were conducting what seemed to be a house-to-house search. Below us, at the base of the ridge, I could hear muffled voices. We rushed further up the mountain. All we could do now was run. We followed the ridge north all morning, stopping only the crouch down when a vehicle traveled along the ridge parallel to us on our left. Most of the traffic was the same steel grey military jeep we had seen before, but occasionally a civilian vehicle would pass. Ironically, the road provided a long landmark and point of security against the wilderness all around us. Ahead, the two ridges grew closer together and more steeply sloped. Jagged outcropping of rock protected the valley floor between. Suddenly, from the north, we saw a jeep like Will's approach, then turn quickly into a side road which looped down into the valley. "That looks like Will," I said, straining to see. "Let us get down there," Marjorie said. "Wait a minute. What if it is trap? What if they have captured him and are using the jeep to lure us out?" Her face fell. "You stay here," I said. "I will go down there and you watch me. If everything okay, then I will motion for you to follow." Reluctantly, she agreed, and I started down the steep mountain toward the spot where the jeep had parked. Through the foliage, I could vaguely see someone get out of the vehicle, but couldn't see who it was, holding on to small bushes and trees. I worked my way between the outcropping, occasionally sliding down in the thick humus. Finally, the vehicle was directly across from me on the opposite slope, perhaps 100 yards away. The driver, leaning against a rear fender, was still obscured. I moved to my right to get a better look. It was Will. I rushed further to my right and felt myself slide. At the last minute, I reached for a tree trunk and pulled myself back up, my stomach twisted with fright. Below me was a sheer drop of 30 feet or more. I had barely avoided killing myself. Still holding the tree, I stood up and tried to gain Will's attention. He was surveying the ridge above my head, and then his eyes dropped and he looked right at me. He jerked up and walked toward me in the bushes. I pointed down to the steep gorge. He surveyed the valley floor, then called me. "I don't see a way across," he said. "You will have to move down the valley and cross there." I nodded and was about to signal Marjorie when I heard a vehicle approaching in the distance. Will jumped into his jeep and sped back toward the main road. I hurried up the hill. I could see Marjorie through the foliage walking toward me. Suddenly, from the area behind her came loud shout in Spanish and the sound of people running. Marjorie hid below a rock overhang. I changed direction, running as quickly as I could to the left. As I ran, I searched for a view of Marjorie through the trees. Just as I caught sight of her, she screamed loudly as two soldiers grabbed her arms and forced her to stand. "Continue to run up to the slope, keeping low, her look of panic frozen in my mind. Once at the top of the ridge, I headed north again, my head pounding with terror and panic. After running more than a mile, I stopped and listened. I could hear no movement or talking behind me. Lying flat on my back, I tried to relax and think clearly, but the awful specter of Marjorie's capture was overwhelming. Why did I ask her to remain on the ridge alone? What should I do now? I sat up and took a deep breath and gazed over at the road on the other ridge. I had seen no traffic while I was running. Again I listened intensely. Nothing except the usual forest sound. Slowly I began to calm down. After all, Marjorie had only been captured. She was guilty of nothing except running from gunfire. Probably she would be detained only until her identity as a legitimate scientist could be established. Once more, I headed north, my back aching slightly. I felt dirty and tired, and pangs of hunger erupted in my stomach. For 2 hours I walked without thinking and without seeing anyone. Then from the slope to my right, I heard a sound of running. I froze and listened again, but the sounds had stopped. Here the trees were larger, shielding the ground below from the sun, thinning the underbrush. I could see 50 or 60 yards. Nothing moved. I walked past a large boulder on my right and several trees, stepping as softly as possible. 3 other massive outcroppings lay along my path, and I moved past 2 of them. Still no movement. I walked around the 3rd boulder. Twigs cracked behind me. I turned around slowly. There next to the rock was the bearded man I had seen at Jensen's farm. His eyes wild, panicked, his arms shaking as he pointed an automatic weapon at my stomach. He seemed to be struggling to remember me. Wait a minute, I stammered. I know Jensen. He looked at me more closely and lowered the weapon. Then from the woods behind us, we heard the sound of someone moving. The bearded man ran past me toward the north, holding the rifle in one hand. Instinctively, I followed. Both of us were running as fast as we could, dodging limbs and rocks and occasionally glancing back. After several hundred yards, he stumbled and I raced past him. I collapsed between 2 rocks to rest and to look back, trying to detect movement. I saw a lone soldier 50 yards away raise his rifle toward the huge man, who was struggling to his feet. Before I could utter a warning, the soldier fired. The man's chest exploded as bullets tore through from the rear, splattering me with blood. An echo of rifle fire filled the air. For an instant he stood motionless, his eyes glazed, then his body arched forward and fell. I reacted blindly, running north again, away from the soldier, keeping the trees between me and the area from which the bullets had come. The ridge grew constantly more rugged and rocky and began to incline dramatically upward. My entire body shook with exhaustion and terror as I struggled up the space between the outcroppings. At one point I slipped and dared a glance backward. The soldier was approaching the body. I slithered around the rock just as the soldier looked up, seemingly right at me. I stayed low to the ground and crawled past several other boulders. Then the slope of the ridge leveled off, blocking the soldier's view. So I jumped to my feet again, running as fast as I could between the rocks and trees. My mind was numb. Escape was all I could think of, though I didn't dare look back. I was sure I heard the soldier running behind me. The ridge inclined ahead and I fought my way up, my strength beginning to wane. At the top of the race, the ground leveled out and was thick with old trees and lush underground. Rising behind them was a sheer rock face that I had to scale delicately, searching for hand and foothold, and I proceeded. I struggled to the top and my heart fell at the sight before me. A drop off of 100 feet or more blocked my way. I could go no further. I was doomed, finished. Rock slid along the outcropping behind me, indicating the soldier was closing fast. I sank to my knees. I was exhausted, spent, and with a final sigh, I realized the last of my fight, accepting my fate. Soon I knew the bullet would come, and I, interestingly, as an end to the terror, death seemed almost a welcome relief. As I waited, my mind flashed to childhood Sundays and to the innocent contemplation of God. What would it be like, death? I tried to open myself to the experience. After a long period of waiting, during which I had no concept of time, I suddenly became aware that nothing had happened. I looked around and noticed for the first time that I was positioned on the highest peak of the mountain. Other ridges and cliffs fell away from the point, leaving me with a panoramic view in all directions. A movement caught my eye. There, far down the slope toward the south, walking casually away from me, was the soldier. A gun belonging to Jensen's men slung across one arm. The sight warmed my body and filled me with ripples of silent laughter. I had somehow survived. I turned and sat cross-legged and savored the euphoria. I wanted to stay here forever. The day was brilliant with sunshine and blue sky. As I sat there, I was struck by the closeness of the purple hills in the distance, or rather, the feeling that they were close. The same perception applied to the few puffs of white cloud drifting overhead. I felt as if I could reach out and touch them with my hand. As I reached up toward the sky, I noticed something different about the way my body felt. My arm had glided upward with incredible ease, as I was holding my back, neck and head perfectly straight with absolutely no effort. From my position, sitting cross-legged, I stood up without using my arm and stretched. The feeling was one of total lightness. Looking at the distant mountain, I noticed that a daytime moon had been out and was about to set. It looked to be about a quarter full of hung over the horizon like an inverted bowl. Instantly, I understood why it had that shape. The sun, millions of miles directly above me, was shining only on the top of the sinking moon. I could perceive the exact line between the sun and the lunar surface, and this recognition somehow extended my consciousness outward even further. I could imagine the moon having already dipped below the horizon, and the exact reflected shape it would present to those who lived further west and could still see it. Then I imagined how it would look when it moved directly under me on the other side of the planet. To the people there, it would appear full because the sun over my head would shine past the earth and strike the moon squarely. This picture sent a rush of sensation up my spine, and my back seemed to straighten even more as I conceived. No, I experienced the same amount of space commonly left over my head as also existed under my feet on the other side of the globe. For the first time in my life, I knew the earth's roundness not as an intellectual concept but as an actual sensation. At one level, this awareness excited me, but at another, it seemed perfectly ordinary and natural. All I wanted to do was immerse myself in the feeling of being suspended, floating amid a space that existed in all directions, rather than having to push myself away from the earth with my legs as I stood there. resisting the Earth's gravity. I now felt as though I was held up by some inner buoyancy, as though I was filled like a balloon with just enough helium to hover over the ground and barely touch it with my feet. It was similarly to being in perfect athletic condition as after a year of intense exercise, only far more coordinated and light. I sat down again on the rock, and again everything seemed close. The rugged outcrop on which I was sitting, the tall trees further down the slope, and the other mountains on the horizon. And as I watched the ribs of the trees sway gently in this breeze, I experienced not just a visual perception of the event, but a physical sensation as well, as if the limbs moving in the wind were hairs on my body. I perceived everything to be somehow part of me. As I sat on the peak of the mountain, looking out at the landscape falling away from me in all directions, it felt exactly as if what I had always known as my physical body was only the head of a much larger body consisting of everything else I could see. Then I experienced the entire universe looking out on itself through my eyes. This perception induced a flash of memory. My mind raced backward in time, past the beginning of my trip to Peru, past my childhood and my birth. The realization was present that my life did not, in fact, begin with my conception and birth on this planet. It began much earlier with the formation of the rest of me, my real body, the universe itself. The science of evolution had always bored me, but now, as my mind continued to rise backward in time, all the things I had read on the subject began to come back to me, including conversation with the friend who resembled Renu. I recalled that this was the field he was interested in, evolution. All knowledge seemed to merge with actual memories. Somehow I was recalling what had happened, and the recollection allowed me to look at evolution in a new way. I watched as the first matter exploded into the universe, and I realized, as the third insight had described, that there was nothing truly solid about it. Matter was only energy vibrating at a certain level, and in the beginning matter existed only in its simplest vibratory form, the element we call hydrogen. That is all. There was in the universe just hydrogen. I observed the hydrogen atom begin to gravitate together, as if the ruling principle, the urge of this energy, was to begin a movement into the more complex state. And when packets of this hydrogen reached a sufficient density, it began to heat up and to burn, to become what we call a star. And in this burning, the hydrogen fused together and leaped into the next higher vibration, the element we call helium. As I continued to watch, these first stars aged and finally blew themselves up and spewed the remaining hydrogen and the newly created helium out into universe, and the whole process began again. The hydrogen helium gravitated together until the temperature became hot enough for new stars to form, and that in turn fused the helium together, creating the element lithium, which vibrated at the next higher level, and so on, each successive generation of star creating matter that had not existed before, until the wide spectrum of matter, the basic chemical elements, had been formed and scattered everywhere. Matter had evolved from the element hydrogen, the simplest vibration of energy, to carbon, which vibrated at an extremely high rate. The stage was now set for the next step in evolution. As our sun formed, pockets of matter fell into orbit around it, and one of them, the earth, containing all the newly created elements, including carbon, As the earth cooled, gases once caught in the molten mass migrated to the surface and merged together, forming water vapor, and the great rain came, forming ocean on the barren crust. Then, when water covered much of Earth's surface, the skies cleared and the sun, burning brightly, bathed the new world with light and heat and radiation. And in the shallow pool and basins, amid the great lightning storms that periodically swept the planet, matter leaped past the vibratory level of carbon to an even more complex state, to the vibration represented by the amino acid. But for the first time, this new level of vibration was not stable in and it itself. Matter had to continually absorb other matter into itself in order to sustain its vibration. It had to eat life. The new thrust of evolution had emerged, still restricted to living only in water. I saw this life split into two distinct forms. One form, the one we call plants, lived on inorganic matter and turning these elements to food by utilizing carbon dioxide from the early atmosphere. As a byproduct, plants released free oxygen into the world for the first time. Plant life spread quickly through the ocean and finally onto the land as well. The other form, what we call animals, absorbed only organic life to sustain their vibration. As I watched, the animals filled the ocean in the great age of fishes, and then the plants had released enough oxygen into the atmosphere, began their own trek toward land. I saw the amphibians, half fish, half something new, leave the water for the first time and use lungs to breathe the new air. Then matter leaped forward again into reptiles and covered the earth in the great period of dinosaurs. Then the warm-blooded mammals came and likewise covered the earth, and I realized that each emerging species represented life matter moving into its next higher vibration. Finally, the progression ended. There at the pinnacle stood humankind. The vision ended. I had seen in one flash the entire story of evolution, the story of matter coming into being and then evolving, as if under some guiding plan toward ever higher vibration, creating the exact conditions finally for humans to emerge, for each of us as individuals to emerge. As I sat there on that mountain, I could almost grasp how this evolution was extended even further in the lives of human beings. Further evolution was related somehow to the experience of life coincidences. Something about this event led us forward in our lives and created a higher vibration that pushed evolution ahead as well. Yet, as hard as I tried, I couldn't quite understand. For a long time, I sat on the rock precipice. I consumed my peace and completeness. Then, abruptly, I became aware that the sun was beginning to sink in the west. I also noticed that toward the northwest, about a mile, was a town of some kind. I could make out the shapes of rooftops. The road on the west ridge seems to meander right to it. I got up and began to climb down the rocks. I laughed out loudly. I was still connected with the landscape, so that I felt I was walking alongside my own body, and more, that I was exploring the region of my own body. The feeling was exhilarating. I made my way down the bluffs and into the trees. The afternoon sun cast long shadows along the forest floor. Halfway down, I came to a particularly thick area of large trees, and as I entered, I experienced a perceptible change in my body. I felt even lighter and more coordinated. I stopped and looked closely at the trees and underlying bushes, focusing on their shape and beauty. I could see flickers of white light and what seemed like a pinkish glow around each plant. I continued to walk, coming to a stream that radiated a pale blue and filled me with an enhanced tranquility and even a dryness. Eventually, I made my way across the valley floor and up the next ridge until I came to the road. I pulled myself up to the gravel surface and walked casually along the shoulder toward the north. Up ahead, I caught sight of a man in a priestess robe rounding the next bend. The sight thrilled me totally without fear. I jogged ahead to talk with him. I knew I would know exactly what to say and do. I had a feeling of perfect well-being, but to my surprise, he had disappeared. To the right, another road angled back down into the valley, but I could see no one in that direction. I ran further up the main road, but saw no one there either. I thought about going back and taking the road I had passed, but I know the town was ahead, so I continued to walk that way. Still, I thought several more times of the other road. 100 yards further, as I rounded another curve, I heard the roar of vehicles. Through the trees, I could see a line of military trucks approaching at a high rate of speed. For a moment I hesitated, thinking I might stand my ground, but then I remembered the terror of the shooting on the ridge. I had time only to fling myself off the road to the right and lie still. Then jeeps sped past me. I had landed in a spot which was completely exposed, and all I could do was hope no one looking my way. Each vehicle passed within 20 feet. I could smell the exhaust fumes and see the expression on every face. Luckily, no one noticed. After they were well past, I crawled behind a large tree. My hands were shaking and my sensation of peace and connection was totally shattered. A now familiar pang of anxiety knotted in my stomach finally. I inched up to the road. The sound of more vehicles sent me scurrying down the slope again. As 2 more jeeps raced past, I felt nauseous. This time, I stayed well off the road and retreated the way I had come, moving very cautiously. I came to the road I had passed earlier. After carefully listening for sound and movement, I decided to walk through the woods beside it, angling back into the valley. My body felt heavy again. What had I been doing? I asked myself. Why had I been walking in that road? I must have been crazy, deluded by the shock of the shooting, entranced in some state of euphoria. Get real, I told myself. You have to be careful. There are people here who will kill you if you make the slightest mistake. I froze. Ahead of me, perhaps 100 feet, was the priest. He was sitting under a large tree that was surrounded by numerous rock outcroppings. As I stared at him, he opened his eyes and looked right at me. I flinched, but he only smiled and motioned for me to walk up. Cautiously, I approached him. He remained motionless, a thin, tall man of about 50 years of age. His hair was cut short and was dark brown in color, matching his eyes. He looked as though you need some help, he said in perfect English. Who are you? I asked. I am Father Sanchez. And you? I explained who I was and where I was from. dizzily, sinking to one knee, and then my buttocks. You were part of what happened in Kula, weren't you? He asked. What do you know of that? I asked wearily, not knowing whether to trust him. I know someone in this government is very angry, he said. They don't want the manuscript publicized. Why? I asked. He stood up and looked down at me. Why don't you come with me? Our mission is only a half-mile away. You will be safe with us. I struggled to my feet, realizing I had no choice, and nodded affirmatively. He led me slowly down the road, his manner respectful and deliberate. He weighed each word. Are the soldiers still looking for you? He asked at one point. I don't know, I replied. He said nothing for a few minutes, then asked, Are you searching for the manuscript? Not anymore, I said. Right now, I just want to survive this and go home. He nodded reassuringly, and I found myself beginning to trust him. Something about his regard and warmth affected me. He reminded me of Will. Presently, we came to the mission, which was a cluster of small houses facing a courtyard and a small church. It was situated in a place of great beauty. As we walked up, he told some of the other robed men something in Spanish, and they scurried away. I tried to see where they were going, but fatigue was engulfing me. The priest led me into one of the houses. Inside was a small living area and 2 bedrooms. A fire burned in the fireplace. Soon after we entered, another priest walked in with a tray of bread and soup. Wearily, I ate as Sanchez sat politely in a chair beside me. Then, upon his insistence, I stretched out on one of the beds and fell into deep sleep. When I walked into the courtyard, I noticed immediately that the grounds were immaculately kept. The gravel walkway were edged with precisely arranged bushes and hedges. Each seemed to be placed so as to accent their full natural shape. None were trimmed. I stretched and felt the starched shirt I had put on. It was made of coarse cotton and chapped my neck slightly. Still, it was clean and freshly ironed. Earlier, I had awakened as to priestess, poured hot water into a tub and laid out fresh clothes. After I had bathed and dressed, I had walked into the other room and found hot muffins and dried fruits on the table. I had eaten ravenously while the priest stood by. After I had finished, the priestess had left and I had walked outside to where I now stood. I walked over and sat on one of the stone benches that faced the courtyard. The sun was just clearing the top of trees, warming my face. How did you sleep? A voice asked from behind me. I turned to see Father Sanchez standing very erect, smiling down at me. Very well, I replied. May I join you? Sure. Neither of us speak for several minutes. So long, in fact, that I felt some discomfort. Several times I looked at him, preparing to say something, but he was looking in the direction of the sun. His face tilted slightly back, his eyes squinting. Finally, he spoke. This is a nice place you found here. Apparently, he meant the bench at this time of the morning. Look, I need to ask your advice, I said. What is the safety way for me to get back to United States? He looked at me seriously. I don't know. That depends on how dangerous the government think you are. Tell me, how you happen to be in Kula. I told him everything from the time I first heard of the manuscript. My feeling of euphoria on the ridge now seemed fanciful and pretentious, so I only alluded to it briefly. Sanchez, however, immediately questioned me about it. What did you do after the soldier failed to notice you and left? He asked. I just sat up there for a few hours, I replied, feeling relieved, I guess. What else did you feel? He asked. I squirmed somewhat, then decided to attempt a description. It is hard to describe, I said. I felt this euphoric connection with everything and this total kind of security and confidence. I was no longer tired. He smiled. You had a mystical experience. Many people report them in that forest near the peak. I nodded tentatively. He turned on the bench to face me more directly. This is the experience the mystics of every religion have always described. Have you read anything about such experiences? Some years ago, I said, but until yesterday it was only an intellectual concept. Yeah, I suppose. A young priest walked up and nodded to me, then whispered something to Sanchez. Sanchez nodded and the young priest turned and walked away. The older priest watched every step the young man took. He crossed the courtyard and entered a park-like area about 100 feet away. I noticed for the first time that this area too was also extremely clean and full of various plants. The young priest walked to several locations, hesitating to each one, as though searching for something. Then at one specific location sat down. He appeared to be engaged in an exercise of some kind. Sanchez smiled and looked pleased, then turned his attention to me. I think it is probably unsafe for you to attempt to go back right now, he said, but I will try to find out what the situation is and if there is any word about your friends. He stood up and faced me. I must attend to some chorus. Please understand that we will assist you in any way possible. For now, I hope you will be comfortable here. Relax and gain your strength. I nodded. He reached inside his pocket and pulled out some papers and handed them to me. This is the 5th insight. It speaks about the kind of experience you had. I think you might find it interesting. I took it reluctantly as he continued speaking. What was your understanding of the last insight you read? He asked. I hesitated. I didn't want to think about manuscripts and insights. Finally, I said that humans are stuck in a kind of competition for each other's energy. When he can get other to acquaintances to our view, they identify with us and that pulls their energy into us and we feel stronger. He smiled. So the problem is that everyone is trying to control and manipulate each other for energy because we feel short of it. That is right, but there is a solution, another source of energy. That is what the last insight implied. He nodded and walked very deliberately into the church. For a few moments, I leaned forward and rested my elbow on my knees, not looking at the translation. I continued to feel reluctant. The event of the last 2 days had dampened my enthusiasm and I preferred instead to think of how I might return to United States. Then in the wooded area across the way, I noticed the young priest stand up and walk slowly to another location about 20 feet from there he was. He turned toward me again and sat down. I was intrigued over that he might be doing. Then it dawned on me that he might be practicing something that was spelled out in the manuscript. I looked at the first page and began to read. It described a new understanding of what has long been called mystical consciousness. during the last decades of the 20th century. It is stated this consciousness would become publicized as a way of being that is actually attainable, a way that has been demonstrated by the more esoteric practitioners of many religions. For most, this consciousness would remain an intellectual concept to be only talked of and debated. But for a growing number of humans, this consciousness would become experimentally real because these individuals would experience flashes or glimpses of this state of mind during the course of their lives. The manuscript said that this experience was the key to ending human conflict in the world because during this experience we are receiving energy from another source, a source we will eventually learn to tap at will. I stopped reading and looked at the young priest again. His eyes were open and he appeared to be looking directly at me. I nodded, even though I couldn't make out the detail of his face. To my surprise, he nodded back to me and smiled faintly. Then he stood up and walked toward my left, heading toward the house in that direction. He avoided my eye as I watched him across the courtyard and enter the dwelling. Behind me, I heard footsteps and turned to see Sanchez leaving the church. He smiled as he approached me. That I didn't take long, he said. Would you like to see more of the grounds? Yes, I would, I replied. Tell me about the sitting area you have. I pointed toward the area where the young priest had been. Let us walk up there, he said. As we strolled across the courtyard, Sanchez told me that the mission was over, 400 years old, and was founded by a unique missionary from Spain who felt the way to convert the local Indians was through their herds, not through coercion with the sword. The approach had worked, Sanchez went on, and partially because of his success and partially due to the remote location, the priest had been left alone to follow his own course. We carry on this tradition of looking inward for the truth, Sanchez said. The sitting area was landscaped immaculately. About half an acre of dense forest had been cleared and the bushes and flowering plants beneath were interspersed with walkway made of smooth river stone, like those in courtyard. The plants here were also spaced perfectly, accurating their unique shape. Where would you like to sit down? Sanchez asked. I looked around at my options. In front of us were several arranged areas, nooks which seemed complete unto themselves. All contained open spaces surrounded by beautiful plants and rocks and large trees of varying shape. One to our left, where the young priest had been last sitting, had more outcroppings of stone. How about over there? I said. He nodded and we walked over to sit down. Sanchez breathed deeply for several minutes, then looked at me. Tell me more about your experience on the ridge, he said. I felt resistant. I don't know what else I can say about it. It didn't last. The priest looked at me sternly. Just because it ended when you became afraid again doesn't negate its importance, does it? Perhaps it is something to be regained, maybe, I said, but it is hard for me to concentrate on feeling cosmic when people are trying to kill me. He laughed, then looked at me warmly. Are you studying the manuscript here at the mission? I asked. Yes, he said. We teach others how to pursue the kind of experience you had on the ridge. You wouldn't mind getting some of that feeling back, would you? A voice from the courtyard interrupted. a priest calling for Sanchez. The old man excused himself and walked down to the courtyard and talked with the priest who had summoned him. I sat back and looked at the plants and rocks nearby, taking my eyes slightly out of focus around the bush closest to me. I could barely make out an area of light, but when I tried it on the rocks, I could see nothing. Then I noticed Sanchez walking back. I must leave for a while, he said as he reached me. I will be going into town for a meeting, so perhaps I can acquire some information concerning your friends, or at least how safe it is for you to travel. Good, I said. Will you back today? I don't think so, he replied. More like tomorrow morning. I must have looking insecure because he walked closer and placed his hand on my shoulder. Don't worry, you are safe here. Please make yourself at home. Look around. It is fine to talk with any of the priestess, but understand that some of them will be more receptive than others, depending on their development. I nodded. He smiled and walked behind the church and entered an old truck I had not noticed. After several attempts, it started, and he drove around the back side of the church and onto the road leading back up the ridge. For several hours I remained in the sitting area, content to gather my thoughts, wondering if Marjorie was all right and if Will had escaped. Several times the image of Jensen's man being killed flashed across my mind, but I fought off the memory and tried to stay calm. About noon, I noticed several priestesses were preparing a long table in the center of the courtyard with dishes of food. When they finished, a dozen or more other priestesses joined them and began serving their own plate and eating on the benches casually. Most of them smiled pleasantly at each other, but I could hear little talking. Each of the priestesses seemed very conscious of my presence, but no one spoke to me. I made several comments about the food, but my words were met only with smiles and polite gestures. If I attempted direct eye contact, they would lower their eyes. I sat down on one of the benches alone and ate. The vegetables and beans were unsalted but spiced with herbs. When lunch was over and the priestesses were stacking their plates on the table, another priest walked out of the church and hastily prepared a plate. When he finished, he looked around for a place to sit and our eyes met. He smiled and I recognized him as the priest who had looked at me from the sitting area earlier. I returned his smile and he walked over and spoke to me in broken English. May I sit on bench with you? He asked. Yes, please, I replied. He sat down and began to eat very slowly, overchewing his food and smiling up at me occasionally. He was short and small, with a very build and coal black hair. His eyes were a lighter brown. You like the food? He asked. I was holding my plate in my lap. Several bits of corn remained. Oh yes, I said, and took a bit. I noticed again how slowly and deliberately he chewed and tried to do the same, and then it struck me that all of the priestesses had been eating that way. Are the vegetables grown here at the mission? I asked. He hesitated before answering, swallowing slowly. Yes, food is very important. Do you meditate with the plants? I asked. He looked at me with obvious surprise. You have read manuscript? He asked. Yes, the first 4 insights. Have you grown food? He asked. Oh no, I am just learning about all this. Do you see energy fields? Yes, sometimes. We sat in silence for a few minutes while he carefully ate several more bites. Food is the first way of gaining energy, he said. I nodded. But in order to totally absorb energy in food, the food must be appreciated. A. He seemed to be struggling for the right English word. Savored, he finally said. Taste is the doorway. You must appreciate taste. This is the reason for prayer before eating. It is not just about being thankful. It is to make eating a holy experience, so the energy from the food can enter our body. He looked closely at me, as though to see whether I understood. I nodded without comment. He looked thoughtful. What he was telling me, I reasoned, was that this kind of deliberate appreciation of food was the real purpose behind the normal religious custom of being thankful, with the result being a higher energy absorption of the food. But taking in food is only first step, he said. After personal energy is increased in this way, you became more sensitive to energy in all things, and then you learn to take this energy into yourself without eating. I nodded affirmatively. Everything around us, he continued, has energy, but each has its own special kind. That is why some places increases energy more than others. It depends on how your shape fits with the energy there. Is that what you were doing up there earlier? I asked, increasing your energy. He looked pleased. Yes. How do you do that? I asked. You have to be open to content and connect, to use your sense of appreciation, as in seeing fields. But you take this one step further so that you get the sensation of being filled up. I am not sure I follow you. He frowned at my denseness. Would you like to walk back to the sitting place? I can show you. Okay, I said. Why not? I followed as he led the way across the courtyard and back to the sitting area. As we arrived, he stopped and looked around, as if surveying the area for something. Over there, he said, pointing to a spot that bordered the dense forest. We followed the path as it would through the trees and bushes. He picked a spot in front of a large tree that grew out of a mound of boulders, so that its huge trunk seemed to be perched on the rock. Its root wrapped around and through the boulders before finally reaching the soil. Flowering shrubs of some type grew in semicircle in front of the tree, and I could detect a strange seed fragrance from the shrub's yellow blossoms. The dense forest provided a solid sheet of green in the background. The priest directed me to sit down in a clear spot amid the bushes, facing the gnarled tree. He sat beside me. Do you think the tree is beautiful? He asked. Yes. Then, feel it. He seemed to be struggling again to find the word. He thought for a moment and then asked, Father Sanchez told me that you had an experience on the ridge. Can you remember how you felt? I felt light and secure and connected. How connected? That is hard to describe, I said. Like the whole landscape was part of me. But what was the feeling? I thought for a minute. What was the feeling? Then it came to me. Love, I said. I guess I felt a love for everything. Yes, he said. That is it. Feel that for the tree. But wait a minute, I protested. Love is something that just happened. I can't make myself love anything. You do not make yourself love, he said. You allow love to enter you. But to do this, you must position your mind by remembering what it felt like and try to feel it again. I looked at the tree and tried to remember the emotion on the ridge. Gradually, I began to admire its shape and presence. My appreciation grew until I actually felt an emotion of love. The feeling was exactly the one I remember as a child for my mother and as a youth for the special little girl that was the object of my puppy love. Yet, even though I had been looking at the tree. This particular love existed as a general background feeling. I was in love with everything. The priest slid away several feet and looked back at me intensely. Good, he said. You are accepting the energy. I noticed his eyes were slightly out of focus. How do you know? I asked. Because I can see your energy field getting larger. I closed my eyes and tried to reach the intense feeling I had acquired on the ridge top, but I couldn't duplicate the experience. What I was feeling was on the same continuum, but to a lesser degree than before. The failure made me frustrated. What happened? He asked. Your energy fell. I don't know, I said. I just couldn't do it as strongly as before. He just looked at me, amused at first, then with impatience. What you experienced on the ridge was a gift, a breakthrough, a look at a new way. Now you must learn to get that experience by yourself, a little at a time. He slid back a foot further and looked at me again. Now try more. I closed my eyes and tried to feel deeply. Eventually the emotion swept over me again. I stayed with it, attempting to increase the feeling by small increment. I focused my regard on the tree. That is very good, he suddenly said. You are receiving energy and giving it to the tree. I looked at him scaredly. I am giving it back to the tree? Then you appreciate the beauty and uniqueness of things, he explained. You received energy. When you get to a level where you feel love, then you can send the energy back just by willing it so. For a long time, I sat there with the tree. The more I focused attention on the tree and admired its shape and color, the more love I seemed to acquire generally. An unusual experience. I imagined my energy flowing over and filling up the tree, but I couldn't see it. Without changing my focus, I noticed the priest get up and begin to walk away. What does it look like when I am giving energy to the tree? I asked. He described the perception in detail, and I recognized it as the same phenomenon I had witnessed when Sarah projected energy into philodendron at Vicente. Though Sarah was successful, she apparently wasn't aware that a state of love was necessary for the projection to take place. She must have been acquiring a love state naturally without realizing it. The priest walked down toward the courtyard and out of my range of vision. I remained in the sitting area until dusk. The two priestesses nodded politely as I entered the house. A roaring fire fended off the evening chill and several oil lamps illuminated the front door. The air was filled with the smell of vegetable or perhaps potato soups. On the table was a ceramic bowl, several spoons, and a plate holding 4 slices of bread. One of the priestesses turned and left without looking at me, and the other kept his eyes lowered and nodded at a large cast iron pot sitting on the hearth by the fire. A candle protruded from under its lid. As soon as I saw the pot, the second priest asked, Is there anything else you need? I think not, I said, thank you. He nodded and left the house as well, leaving me alone. I lifted the lid from the pot, potato soup. It smelled rich and delicious. I poured several ladles full into the bowl and sat down at the table, then pulled the part of the manuscript Sachs had given me from my pocket and placed it beside my plate, intending to read. But the soup tasted so good that I focused entirely on eating. After I finished, I placed the dishes in a large pan and stared at the fire, hypnotized until the flame burned low. Then I turned down the lamps and went to bed. The next morning, I awakened at dawn feeling totally refreshed. Outside, a morning mist rolled through the courtyard. I stoked up the fire and put several pieces of candling on the coal and fanned it until it caught up. I was about to look through the kitchen for food when I heard Satch's truck approaching. I walked outside as he emerged from behind the church, a backpack in one arm and several packages in the other. I have some news, he said, motioning me to follow him back inside the house. Several other priestesses appeared with hot corn cake and grits and more dried fruit. Satchas greeted the man, then sat with me at the table as the priestess scurried away. I attended a meeting of some of the priestesses of the Southern Council, he said. We were there to talk about the manuscript. At issue was the government's aggressive actions. This was the first time any group of priestesses has met publicly in support of this document, and we were just beginning our discussion when a government representative knocked on the door and asked to be admitted. He paused as he served his plate and took several bites, chewing them thoroughly. The representative, he continued, assumed as that the government's sole purpose was to protect the manuscript from outside exploitation. He informed us that all copies being held by Peruvian citizens must be licensed. He said he understood our concern but asked us to comply with this law and turn in our copies. He promised that government duplicates would be issued back to us at once. Did you turn them in? I asked. Of course not. We both ate for a few minutes. I tried to overchew to appreciate the taste. We asked about the violence in Kula. He went on and he told us that this was a necessary reaction against a man called Jensen, that several of his men were armed agents from another country. He said they planned to find and steal the undiscovered part of the manuscript and remove it from Peru. So the government had no choice but to arrest them. There was no mention of you or your friends. Did you believe the government man? No, we didn't. After he left, we continued the meeting. We agreed that our policy would be one of quiet resistance. It will continue to make copies and distribute them carefully. Will your church leaders allow you to do that? I asked. We don't know, Sacha said. The church elder have disapproved of the manuscript but so far have not seriously investigated who is involved with it. Our main concern is a cardinal who resides further north, Cardinal Sebastian. He is the most vocal in opposition to the manuscript and is very influential. If he convinces the leadership to issue strong proclamation, then we will have a very interesting decision to make. Why is he so opposed to the manuscript? He is afraid. Why? I haven't spoken with him in a long time and we always avoid the subject of manuscript, but I believe he thinks man's role is to appreciate in the cosmos ignorance or spiritual knowledge by faith alone. He thinks the manuscript will undermine the status quo, the line of authority in the world. How would it do that? He smiled and tilted his head back slightly. The truth shall set you free. I was looking at him, trying to understand what he meant, eating the last of the bread and fruit on my plate. He ate several more tiny bits and pushed his chair back. You seem much stronger, he said. Did you talk with anyone here? Yes, I replied. I learned a method of connecting with the energy from one of the priestesses. I didn't catch his name. He was in the sitting area while we were talking in the courtyard yesterday morning. Remember? When I spoke with him later, he showed me how to absorb energy and then to project it back. His name is John, Sanchez said, then nodded for me to go on. It was an amazing experience, I said, by remembering the love I felt I was able to open up. I sat up there all day, simmering in it. I didn't reach the state I experienced on the ridge, but I got close. Sanchez looked more serious. The role of love was being misunderstood for a long time. Love is not something we should do to be good or to make the world a better place out of some abstract moral responsibility, or because we should give up our hedonism. Connecting with energy feels like excitement, then euphoria, and then love. Finding enough energy to maintain that state of love certainly helps the world, but it must directly help us. It is the most hedonistic thing we can do. I agreed, then noticed he had moved his chair back several more feet and was looking at me intensely, his eyes unfocused. So, what does my field look like? I asked. It is much larger, he said. I think you feel very good. I do. Good. That is what we do here. Tell me about that, I said. We train priestess to go further into the mountain and work with the Indians. It is a lonely job, and the priestess must have great strength. All of the men here have been screened thoroughly and all have one thing in common. Each has had one experience he calls mystical. I have been studying this kind of experience for many years, he continued, even before the manuscript was found, and I believe that when one has already encountered a mystical experience, getting back into his state and raised one's personal energy level comes much easier. Others can also connect, but it takes longer. A strong memory of the experience as a thing you learned facilitate its recreation. After that, one slowly builds back. What does a person's energy field look like when this is happening? It grows outward and changes color slightly. What color? Normally from a dull white toward green and blue. But the most important thing is that it expands. For instance, during your mystical encounter on the ridge top, your energy flashed outward into the whole universe. Essentially, you connected and drew energy from the entire cosmos, and in turn your energy swelled to encompass everything, everywhere. Can you remember how that felt? Yeah, I said. I felt as though the entire universe was my body and I was just the head, or perhaps more accurately, the eyes. Yes, he said, and at that moment your energy field and that of the universe were the same. The universe was your body. I had a strange memory during that time, I said. I seemed to remember how this larger body, this universe of mine, evolved. I was there. I saw the first stars formed from simple hydrogen and then saw more complex matter evolve in successive generation of these suns. Only I didn't see matter. I saw matter is simple vibration of energy that were evolving systematically into ever more complex higher states. Then life began and evolved to a point where humans appeared. I stopped suddenly and he noticed my changed mood. What is wrong? He said. That is where the memory of evolution stopped. I explained. With humans, I felt as if the story continued, but I couldn't quite grasp it. The story does go on, he said. Humans are carrying forth the universe evolution toward higher and higher vibrational complexity. How? I asked. He smiled but didn't answer. Let us talk about this later. I really must check on a few things. I will see you in an hour or so. I nodded. He picked up an apple and walked out. I wandered outside behind him, then remembered the copy of the Fifth Insight in the bedroom and retrieved it. Earlier I had been thinking of the forest where Sachs had been sitting when I had first met him. Even in my fatigue and panic, I had noticed that the place was extraordinarily beautiful. So I walked down the road toward the west until I came to the exact spot, then sat down there myself. Leaning back against a tree, I cleared my mind and spent several minutes looking around. The morning was bright and breezy, and I watched the wind as it whipped the branches above my head. The air felt refreshing as I took in several deep breaths. During a lull in the wind, I took out the manuscript and looked for the page where I had stopped reading before I could locate it. However, I heard the sound of a truck engine. I lay flat beside the tree and attempted to determine its direction. The sound was coming from the mission. As it grew closer, I could see it was Sachs' old truck with him driving. I thought, "You might be here," he said, as he pulled up to where I was standing. "Get in. We need to leave." "What is going on?" I asked, sliding into the passenger seat. He drove on toward the main road. One of my priestess told me of a conversation he overheard in the village. Some government officials are in town and they were asking questions about me and the mission. "What do you think they want?" He looked at me reassuringly. "I don't know. Let us just say I am not as certain as before that they will leave us alone. I thought, as a precaution, that we should drive up into the mountains. One of my priestess lives near Machu Picchu. His name is Father Carl. We will be safe at his house until we can better read the situation." He smiled. "I want you to see Machu Picchu anyway." I suddenly had a flash of suspicion that he had made a deal and was taking me somewhere to turn me in. I decided to proceed cautiously and to stay alert until I found out for sure. "Did you finish the translation?" he asked. "Most of it," I said. "You had asked about human evolution. Did you finish that part?" "No." He turned his eyes from the road and looked at me intensely. I pretended not to notice. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. "How long will it take to get to Machu Picchu?" "After 4 hours." I wanted to remain silent and let Sachs talk, hoping he might give himself away, but I couldn't control my curiosity about evolution. "So, how do humans further evolution?" I asked. He glanced at me. "What do you think?" "I don't know," I said. "But when I was up on the ridge, I thought it might have something to do with the meaningful coincidences that the first insight talks about." "That is right," he said. "That would fit with the other insight, wouldn't it?" I was confused. I almost understood, but I couldn't quite grasp it. I remained silent. "Think of how the insight fall into sequence," he said. "The first insight occurs when we take the coincidences seriously. These coincidences make us feel there is something more, something spiritual, operating underneath everything we do. The second insight institutes our awareness as something real. We can see that we have been preoccupied with material survival, with focusing on controlling our situation in the universe for security, and we know our openness now represents a kind of waking up to what is really going on. The third insight begins a new view of life. It defines the physical universe as one of pure energy, an energy that somehow responds to how we think. And the fourth exposes the human tendency to steal energy from other humans by controlling them, taking over their minds, a crime in which we engage because we so often feel depleted of energy and cut off. This shortage of energy can be remedied Of course, when we connect with the higher source, the universe can provide all we need if we can only open up to it. That is the revelation of the fifth insight. In your case, he continued, you had a mystical experience that allowed you to briefly see the magnitude of energy one can acquire, but this state is like leaping ahead of everyone else and glimpsing the future. We can't maintain it for very long. Once we try to talk to someone who is operating in normal consciousness, or try to live in a world where conflict is still happening, we get knocked out of this advanced state and fall back to the level of our old selves. And then he continued, it is a matter of slowly regaining what we glimpsed a little at a time and to begin a progression back toward that ultimate consciousness. But to do this, we must learn to consciously fill up with energy, because this energy brings on the coincidences, and the coincidences help us actualize the new level on a permanent basis. I must have looked puzzled because he said, think about it. When something occurs beyond chance to lead us forward in our lives, then we become more actualized people. We feel as though we are attaining what destiny is leading us to become. When this occurs, the level of energy that brought on the coincidences in the first place is instituted in us. We can be knocked out of it and lose energy when we are afraid. But this level serves as a new outer limit which can be regained quite easily. We have become a new person. We exist at a level of higher energy, at a level, get this, of higher vibration. Can you see the process now? We fill up, grow, fill up and grow again. That is how we as humans continue the evolution of the universe to a higher and higher vibration. He paused for a moment, then seemed to think of something he wanted to add. This evolution has been going on unconsciously throughout human history. That explains why civilization has progressed and why humans have grown larger, lived longer, and so forth. Now, however, we are making the whole process conscious. That is what the manuscript is telling us. That is what this movement toward a worldwide spiritual consciousness is all about. I was listening intensely, totally fascinated with what Sanchez was telling me. So all we have to do is fill up with energy, as I learned to do with John, and the coincidences began to happen more consistently. Well, yes, but that is not as easy as you think. Before we can connect with the energy on a permanent basis, there is one more hurdle we must pass. The next insight, the sixth, deals with this issue. What is it? He looked scaredly at me. We must face up to our particular way of controlling others. Remember, the fourth insight reveals that humans have always felt short of energy and have sought to control each other to acquire the energy that flows between people. The fifth then slows and shows us that an alternative source exists, but we cannot really stay connected with this source until we come to grips with the particular method that we as individuals use in our controlling, and stop doing it, because whenever we fall back into this habit, we get disconnected from the source. Getting rid of this habit isn't easy because it is always unconscious at first. The key to letting it go is to bring it fully into consciousness, and we do that by seeing that our particular style of controlling others is one we learned in childhood to get attention, to get the energy moving our way, and we are stuck there. This style is something we repeat over and over again I call it our consciousness. Control drama. I call it a drama because it is one familiar scene, like a scene in a movie, for which we write the script as youths. Then we repeat the scene over and over in our daily lives without being aware of it. All we know is that the same kind of events happening to us repeatedly. The problem is if we are repeating one particular scene over and over, then the other scenes of our real life movie, the high adventure marked by coincidence, can't go forward. We stop the movie when we repeat this one drama in order to manipulate our energy. Sachs slowed the truck and moved carefully forward through a series of deep ruts in the road. I realized I was frustrated. I couldn't quite grasp how a control drama worked. I almost expressed my feeling to Sachs, but I couldn't. I realized I still felt distant from him, and I didn't care to reveal myself. Did you understand? He asked. I don't know, I said curtly. I don't know if I have a control drama. He looked at me with the warmest regard and chuckled out loud. Is that so? He asked. When? Why do you always act so aloof? Part 6. Clearing the past. Ahead the road narrowed and bent sharply around the sheer rock face of the mountain. The truck bounced over several large rocks and slowly proceeded through the curve below. The Andes rose in massive grey ridges above banks of snow-white clouds. I looked at Sachs. He was leaning over the steering wheel, tense. For most of the day, we had been scaling steep inclines and edging through passages made more narrow by fallen rock. I had wanted to broach the subject of controlled dramas again, but the time seemed inappropriate. Sachs appeared to need every ounce of energy for driving, and besides, I wasn't clear on what I wanted to ask. I had read the rest of the fifth insight, and it had echoed exactly the point Sachs had related to me. The idea of getting rid of my style of controlling seemed desirable, especially if it would make my evolution accelerate, but I still couldn't grasp how a control drama operated. What are you thinking about? Sachs asked. I finished reading the fifth insight, I said, and I was thinking about these dramas, considering what you said about me. I assume you think my drama has something to do with being aloof? He didn't reply. He was staring up the road. 100 feet ahead, a large four-wheeler drive vehicle blocked the way. A man and a woman stood on a rock precipice 50 feet from the vehicle. They returned our gaze. Sachs stopped the truck and looked them over for an instant, then smiled. I know the woman, he said. That is Julia. It is all right. Let us talk with them. Both the man and woman were of dark complexion and appeared Peruvian. The woman was older, appearing to be adult 50, while the man looked approximately 30. As we got out of the truck, the woman walked toward us. Father Sachs, she said as she approached. How are you, Julia? Sachs replied. The two embraced. Then Sachs introduced me to Julia. Julia in turn introduced her companion, Ronaldo. Saying nothing else, Julia and Sachs turned their backs on us and walked toward the overhang where Julia and Ronaldo had previously been standing. Ronaldo looked at me intensely, and I instinctively turned and walked in the direction of the other two people. Ronaldo followed, still looking at me as though he wanted something. Although his hair and features were young, his complexion was ruby and red. For some reason, I felt anxious. Several times, as we walked to the edge of the mountain, he looked as though he was going to speak, but each time I turned my eyes away and increased my pace. He remained silent. When we reached the precipice, I sat on an edge to prevent him from sitting next to me. Julia and Sanchez were above me, about 25 feet, sitting together on a large boulder. Ronaldo sat as close to me as possible, although his constant stare bothered me. I was slightly curious about him at the same time. He caught me looking at him and asked, "Are you here for the manuscript?" I took a long time to answer, "I have heard of it." He looked perplexed. "Have you seen it?" "Some," I said. "Do you have something to do with it?" "I am interested," he said, "but I have not seen any copies yet." A period of silence followed. "Are you from the United States?" he asked. The question disturbed me, so I decided not to answer. Instead, I asked, "Does the manuscript have anything to do with the ruin at Machu Picchu?" "I don't think so," he replied, "except that it was written about the same time they were built." I remained silent, looking out at the incredible view of the Andes. Sooner or later, if I remained quiet, he would divulge what he and Julia were doing here and how it concerned the manuscript. We sat for 20 minutes with no conversation. Finally, Ronaldo stood and walked up to where the others were talking. I was perplexed as to what to do. I had avoided sitting with Sanchez and Julia because I had the distinct impression they wanted to talk alone. For perhaps another 30 minutes, I remained there, gazing out at the rocky peaks and straining to overhear the conversation above me. None of them paid me the slightest bit of attention. Finally, I decided to join them, but before I could move, the three of them stood and began walking toward Julia's vehicle. I cut across the rocks toward them. "They have to go," Sanchez remarked as I approached. "I am sorry, we did not have time to talk," Julia said. "I hope we see you again." She was looking at me with the same warmth Sanchez often displayed. As I nodded, she cocked her head slightly and added, "In fact, I have a feeling we will see you soon." As we strolled down the rocky path, I felt the need to say something in response, but I couldn't think. When we reached her vehicle, Julia only nodded slightly and said a quick goodbye. Both she and Ronaldo got in, and Julia drove away toward the north, the way Sanchez and I had come. I felt puzzled by the entire experience. Once we were in our vehicle, Sanchez asked, "Did Ronaldo fill you in on Will?" "No," I said. "Had they seen him?" Sanchez looked confused. "Yes, they saw him at a village 40 miles east of here." "Did Will say anything about me?" "Julie and Will mentioned being separated from you," she said. "Will talked mainly with Ronaldo. Didn't you tell Ronaldo who you were?" "No, I didn't know if I could trust him." Sanchez looked at me in total bewilderment. "I told you it was fine to talk with them. I have known Julia for years. She owned a business in Lima. But since the discovery of manuscript, she has been looking for the ninth insight. Julia would not be traveling with anyone untrustworthy. There was no danger. Now you missed what could have been important information." Sanchez looked at me with a serious expression. "This is a perfect example of how a controlled drama interferes," he said. "You were so aloof, you didn't allow an important coincidence to take place." I must have appeared defensive. "It is all right," he said. Everyone play a drama of one kind or another. At least now you understand how yours works. I don't understand, I said. What exactly am I doing? Your way of controlling people and situations, he explained. In order to get energy coming your way is to create this drama in your mind during which you withdraw and look mysterious and secretive. You tell yourself that you are being cautious, but what you are really doing is hoping someone will be pulling into this drama and will try to figure out what is going on with you. When someone does, you remain vague, forcing them to struggle and dig and try to discern your true feelings. As they do so, they give you their full attention and that sends their energy to you. The longer you can keep them interested and mystified, the more energy you received. Unfortunately, when you play aloof, your life tends to evolve very slowly because you are repeating the same scene over and over again. If you had opened up to Ronaldo, your life move would have taken off in a new and meaningful direction. I felt myself become depressed. All this was just another example of what Will and pointed out when he saw me resisting giving information to Renault. It was true. I did tend to hide what I really thought. I looked out the window as we followed the road higher into the peaks. Sanchez concentrated again on avoiding the fatal drop-offs. When the road straightened, he looked over at me and said, "The first step in the process of getting clear for each of us is to bring our particular control drama into full consciousness. Nothing can proceed until we really look at ourselves and discover what we are doing to manipulate our energy. This is what has just happened to you." "What is the next step?" I asked. "Each of us must go back into our past, back into our early family life and see how this habit was formed. Seeing its inception keeps our way of controlling in consciousness. Remember, most of our family members were operating in a drama themselves, trying to pull energy out of us as children. This is why we had to form a control drama in the first place. We had to have a strategy to win energy back. It is always in relation to our family members that we develop our particular dramas. However, once we recognize the energy dramatics in our families, we can go past these control strategies and see what was really happening." "What do you mean, really happening?" "Each person must reinterpret his family experience from an evolutionary point of view, from a spiritual point of view, and discover who he really is. Once we do that, our control drama falls away and our real life take off." "So, how do I begin?" "By first understanding how your drama was formed. Tell me about your father. He is a good man who is fun-loving and capable." But I hesitated, not wanting to sound ungrateful toward my father. "But what?" Sanchez asked. "Well," I said, "he was always critical. I could never do anything right." "How did he criticize you?" Sanchez asked. A picture of my father, young and strong, appeared in my mind. He asked questions, then found something wrong with the answers. "And what happened to your energy?" I guess I felt drained, so I tried to keep from telling him anything. "You mean you got vague and distant, trying to say things in a way that would get his attention but not reveal enough to give him something to criticize. He was the interrogator and you dodged around him with your aloofness." "Yeah, I guess. But what is an interrogator?" "An interrogator is another kind of drama. People who use this mean of gaining energy set up a drama of asking questions and probing into another person's world with the specific purpose of finding something wrong. What they do, they criticize their aspect of others' life. If this strategy succeeds, then the person being criticized is pulled into the drama. They suddenly find themselves become self-conscious around the interrogator and paying attention to what the interrogator is doing and thinking about, so as not to do something wrong that the interrogator would notice. The psychic reference gives the interrogator the energy he desires. Think about the time you have been around someone like this. When you get caught up in this drama, don't you tend to act a certain way so that the person wouldn't criticize you? He pulls you off your own path and drains your energy because you judge yourself by what he might be thinking. I remembered the feeling exactly, and the person that came to mind was Jensen. So my father was an interrogator? I asked. That is what it sounded like. For a moment I was lost in thought about my mother's drama. If my father was an interrogator, what was my mother? Sanchez asked me what I was thinking. I was wondering about my mother's control drama, I said. How many different kinds are there? Let me explain the classification spoken of in the manuscript. Sanchez said, everyone manipulates for energy, either aggressively, directly, forcing people to pay attention to them, or passively, playing on people's sympathy or curiosity to gain attention. For instance, if someone threatens you, either verbally or physically, then you are forced, for fear of something bad happening to you, to pay attention to him and so to give him energy. The person threatening you would be pulling you into the most aggressive kind of drama, what the sixth insight called the intimidator. If, on the other hand, someone tells you all the horrible things that are already happening to them, implying perhaps that you are responsible and that if you refuse to help, these horrible things are going to continue, then this person is seeking to control at the most passive level, with that the manuscript called poor me drama. Think about this one for a moment. Haven't you ever been around someone who makes you feel guilty when you are in their presence, even though you know there is no reason to feel this way? Yes. Well, it is because you have entered the drama world of a poor me. Everything they say and do puts you in a place where you have to defend against the idea that you are not doing enough for this person. That is why you feel guilty just being around them. I nodded. Anyone's drama can be examined, he continued, according to where it falls on this spectrum from aggressive to passive. If a person is subtle in their aggression, finding fault and slowly understanding your world in order to get your energy, then, as we saw in your father, this person would be an interrogator, less passive than the poor me would be your aloofness drama. So the order of drama goes this way: intimidator, interrogator, aloof, and poor me. Does that make sense? I guess. You think everyone falls somewhere among these styles? That is correct. Some people use more than one in different circumstances, but most of us have one dominant control drama that we tend to repeat depending on which one worked well on the members of our early family. It suddenly dawned on me. My mother did exactly the same thing to me as my father. I looked at Sanchez. My mother, I know what she was. She was also an interrogator. So you had a double dose, Sanchez said. No wonder you are so aloof. But at least they weren't intimidating you. That least you never feared for your safety. What would have happened in that case? You would have become stuck in a poor me drama. Do you see how this works? If you are a child and someone is draining your energy by threatening you with bodily harm, then being aloof doesn't work. You can't get them to give you energy by playing coy. They don't give a damn that is going on inside you. They are coming on too strong, so you are forced to become more passive and to try the poor me approach, appealing to the mercy of the person, guilt tripping them out the harm they are doing. If this doesn't work, then as a child you enter until you are big enough to explode against the violence and fight aggression with aggression. He paused, like the child you told me about, the one in the Peruvian family that serves you dinner. A person goes to whatever extreme necessary to get attention energy in their family, and after that this strategy becomes their dominant way of controlling to get energy from everyone. The drama they constantly repeat. I understand the intimidator, I said, but how does the interrogator develop? What would you do if you were a child and your family members were either not there or ignored you because they were preoccupied with their careers or something? I don't know. Playing aloof would not get their attention. They wouldn't notice. Wouldn't you have to resort to probing and praying and finally finding something wrong in these aloof people in order to force attention and energy? This is what an interrogator does. I began to get the insight. Aloof people create interrogators. That is right. And interrogators make people aloof. And intimidators create the poor me approach. Or if this fails, another intimidator. Exactly. That is how control dramas perpetuate themselves. But remember, there is a tendency to see these dramas in others, but to think that we ourselves are free from such devices. Each of us must transcend this illusion before we can go on. Almost all of us tend to be stuck, at least some of the time, in a drama, and we have to step back and look at ourselves long enough to discover what it is. I was silent for a moment. Finally, I looked at Sanchez again and asked, once we see our drama, what happens next? Sanchez slowed the truck in order to look me in the eyes. We are truly free to become more than the unconscious act we play. As I said before, we can find a higher meaning for our lives, a spiritual reason we were born to our particular families. We can begin to get clear about who we really are. We are almost there, Sanchez said. The road was cresting between two peaks. As we passed the huge formation on our right, I saw a small house ahead. It backed up to another majestic pinnacle of rock. His truck isn't here, Sanchez said. We parked and walked to the house. Sanchez opened the door and walked inside while I waiting. I took in several breaths. The air was cool and very thin overhead. The sky was dark grey and thick with clouds. It looks as though it might rain. Sanchez walked back to the door. No one is inside. He must be at the ruins. How do we get there? He suddenly looked exhausted. They are up ahead, about a half mile, he said, handing me the keys to the truck. Follow the road, past the next ridge and you will see them down below. Take the truck. I want to stay here and meditate. Okay, I will, I said, walking around to get in the vehicle. I drove forward into a little valley and then up the next ridge, anticipating the view. The sight did not disappoint me. As I crested the ridge, I saw the full splendor of the ruins at Machu Picchu, a temple complex of massive, carefully shaped rocks, weighing sitting atop each other on the mountain, each in the dull cloudy light. The beauty of the place was overwhelming. I stopped the truck and soaked up the energy for 10 or 15 minutes. Several groups of people were walking through the ruins. I saw a man wearing a priestess collar leave the remains of a building and walk toward a vehicle parked nearby. Because of the distance and because of the man wore a leather jacket rather than a priestess robe, I couldn't be sure it was Father Carl. I started the truck and drove closer. As soon as he heard the sound, he looked up and smiled, apparently recognizing the vehicle as belonging to Sanchez. When he saw me inside, he looked interested and walked over. His build was short and squat, with dull brown hair and pudgy features, with deep blue eyes. He looked to be about 30. I am with Father Sanchez, I said, stepping from the vehicle and introducing myself. He is up at your house. He offered his hand. I am Father Carl. I glanced past him to the ruins. The cut stone was even more impressive than in close proximity. Is this the first time you have been here? He asked. Yes, it is, I replied. I have heard about this place for years, but I never anticipated this. It is one of the highest energy centers in the world, he said. I looked closely at him. Clearly, he spoke about energy in the same sense it was used in the manuscript. I nodded affirmatively, then said, I am at a point where I am consciously trying to build energy and deal with my control drama. I felt somewhat pretentious at saying that, but comfortable enough to be honest. You don't seem too aloof, he said. I was startled. How do you know that was my drama? I asked. I have developed an instinct for it. That is why I am here. You help people see their way of controlling? Yes, and their true self. His eyes shone with sincerity. He was totally direct, with no hint of embarrassment at revealing himself to a stranger. I remained silent, so he said, You understand the first 5 insights? I have read most of them, I said, and I have talked with several people. As soon as I made this statement, I realized I was being too vague. I think I understand the first 5. I added, it is number 6 that I am not clear about. He nodded, then said, Most of the people I talk with haven't even heard of the manuscript. They come up here and are entranced by the energy. That alone makes them rethink their lives. How do you meet these people? He looked at me with a knowing impression. They seem to find me. You said you help them find their true self. How? He took a long breath, then said, There is only one way. Each of us has to go back to our family experience, that childhood time and place, and review what happened. Once we become conscious of our control drama, then we can focus on the higher truth of our family, the silver lining, so to speak, that lies beyond the energy conflict. Once we find this truth, it can energize our lives. For this truth tells us who we are, the path we are on, what we are doing. That is what Sanchez has told me, I said. I want to know more about how to find this truth. He zipped up his coat against the late afternoon chill. I hope we can talk more about it later, he said. Right now, I would like to greet Father Sanchez. I looked out at the ruins, and he added, Feel free to look around as long as you would like. I will see you back at my house later. For the next hour and a half, I walked through the ancient site. At certain spot, I would linger, feeling more buoyant than at that others. I wondered with fascination about the civilization that had built these temples? How did they move these stones up here and place them atop one another in this fashion? It seemed impossible. As my intense interest in the ruins began to wane, my thoughts turned to my personal situation. Although my circumstances had not changed, I felt less fearful now. Sanchez's confidence had reassured me. I had been stupid to doubt him, and I already liked Father Carl. As darkness descended, I walked back to the truck and returned to Father Carl's house. As I drove up, I could see the two men standing close to each other inside. When I entered, I heard laughter. Both were busy in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Father Carl greeted me and escorted me to a chair. I sat down lazily in front of a large fire in the fireplace and looked around. The room was large and panelled with wide boards which were lightly stained. I could see two other bedrooms apparently linked by a narrow hallway. The house was lit with low wattage bulbs, and I thought I could detect the faint hum of a generator. When the preparations were completed, I was summoned to a rough plank table. Sanchez offered a brief prayer, and then we ate, the two men continuing to talk. Afterward, we sat together by the fire. Father Carl has spoken with will, Sanchez said when I asked, immediately excited. Will came through here several days ago, Father Carl said. I had met him a year ago and he came by to bring me some information. He said he thought he knew who was behind the governmental action against the manuscript. Who? I asked. Cardinal Sebastian, Sanchez interjected. What is he doing? I asked. Apparently, Sanchez said, he is using his influence with the government to increase the military pressure against the manuscript. He has always preferred to work quietly through the government rather than force a division within the church. Now he is intensifying his effort. Unfortunately, it may be working. What do you mean? I asked. Except for the few priests of the Northern Council and a few others like Julia and Will, no one else seems to have copies any longer. What about the scientists at Vicent? I asked. Both men were silent for a moment. Then Father Carl said, Will told me the government has closed it down. All the scientists were arrested and their research data was confiscated. Will the scientific community stand for that? I asked. What choice do they have? Sanchez said. Besides that, research wasn't accepted by most scientists anyway. The government is apparently selling the idea that these people were breaking the law. I can't believe the government could get away with doing that. Apparently they have, Father Carl said. I made some calls to check and I received the same story, though they are keeping it very quiet. The government is intensifying its crackdown. What do you think will happen? I asked them both. Father Carl shrugged his shoulders and Father Sanchez said, I don't know. It may depend on what Will finds. Why? I asked. He appears to be close to finding the missing part of the manuscript, the ninth inside. Perhaps when he does, there will be enough interest to create worldwide intervention here. Where did he say he was going? I asked Father Carl. He didn't know exactly, but he said his intuitions were leading him further north, near Guatemala. His intuitions were leading him? Yes, you will understand that after you get clear about who you are and go on to the seventh insight. I looked at both of them, at how incredibly serene they appeared. How can you remain so calm? I asked. What if they come crashing in here and arrest all of us? They gazed at me patiently. Then Father Sachs spoke. Don't confuse calmness with carelessness. Our peaceful continence is a measure of how well we are connected with the energy. We stay connected because it is the best thing for us to do, regardless of the circumstances. You understand that, don't you? Yes, I said, of course. I guess I am having trouble staying connected myself. Both men smiled. Staying connected, Father Cole said, will be easier once you get clear on who you are. Father Sachs stood up then and walked away, announcing that he could be doing the dishes. I looked at Father Cole. Okay, I said, how do I start getting clear about myself? Father Sachs tells me, he replied, that you already understand the control dramas of your parents. That is right. They were both interrogators, and that made me aloof. Okay, now you must look past the energy competition that existed in your family and search for the real reason you were there. I looked at him blankly. The process of finding your true spiritual identity involves looking at your whole life as one long story, trying to find a higher meaning. Begin by asking yourself this question: why was I born to this particular family? What might have been the purpose for that? I don't know, I said. Your father was an interrogator. What else was he? You mean, what did he stand for? Yes, I thought for a moment, then said, my father genuinely believed in enjoying life, in living with integrity, but making the most of what life has to offer. You know, living life to the fullest. Has he been able to do this? To some extent, but somehow he always seemed to have a run of bad luck just when he thinks he is about to enjoy life the most. Father Cole squinted his eyes in contemplation. He believes life is for fun and enjoyment, but he hasn't quite pulling it off. Yes. Have you thought about why? Not really. I always figured he was unlucky. Maybe he hasn't found the way to do it yet. Maybe not. What about your mother? She is no longer living. Can you see what her life represented? Yes, her life was her church. She stood for Christian principles. In what way? She believed in community service and in following God's laws. Did she follow God's laws? To the letter, at least so far as her church taught. Was she able to convince your father to do the same thing? I laughed. Not really. My mother wanted him to go to church every week and to be involved in community programs. But as I told you, he was more of a free spirit than that. So, where did that leave you? I looked at him. I have never thought about it. Didn't they both want your allegiance? Wasn't that why they were interrogating you? To make sure you weren't siding with the values of the other? Didn't they both want you to think their way was the best? Yes, you are right. How did you respond? I just tried to avoid taking a stand, I guess. They both monitored you to see if you were measuring up to their particular views, and unable to please both, you become aloof. That is about it, I said. What happened to your mother? He asked. She developed Parkinson's disease and died after being sick for a long time. Did she remain true to her faith? Absolutely, I said. Throughout it all. So, what meaning did she leave you with? What? You are looking for the meaning her life has for you. The reason you were born to her. What you were there to learn. Every human being, whether they are conscious of it or not, illustrates with their lives how he or she thinks a human being is supposed to live. You must try to discover what she taught you and at the same time what about her life could have been done better. What you would have changed about your mother is part of what you yourself are working on. Why only part? Because how you would improve on your father's life is the other part. I was still confused. He placed his hand on my shoulder. We are not merely the physical creation of our parents. We are also the spiritual creation. You were born to these two people and their lives had an irrevocable effect on who you are. To discover your real self, you must admit that the real you began in a position between their truths. That is why you were born there, to take a higher perspective on what they stood for. Your path is about discovering a truth that is a higher synthesis of what these two people believed. I nodded. So, how would you express what your parents taught you? I am not sure, I replied. What do you think? My father thought life was about maximizing his aliveness, his enjoyment of who he was, and he tried to pursue that end. My mother believed more than sacrifice, and in spending her time in servicing to others, denying herself. She felt this is what the scriptures command. And you, how do you feel about this? I don't know really. Which viewpoint would you choose for yourself? That of your mother or that of your father? Neither. I mean, life is not that simple. He laughed. You are being vague. I guess I don't know. But if you had to choose one or the other, I hesitated, trying to think honestly. Then the answer came to me. They are both correct, I said, and incorrect. His eyes beamed. How? I am not sure exactly, but I think a correct life must include both views. The question for you, Father Cole said, is how? How does one live a life that is both? From your mother, you received the knowledge that life is about spirituality. From your father, you learned that life is about self-enhancement, fun, adventure. So my life, I interrupted, is about somehow combining the two approaches. Yes, for you, spirituality is a question. Your whole life will be about finding one that is self-enhancing. This is the problem. Your parents were unable to reconcile the one they left for you. This is your evolutionary question, your quest this lifetime. The idea propelled me into deep thought. Father Cole said something else, but I couldn't concentrate on what he was saying. The waning fire was having a calming effect on me. I realized I was tired. Father Cole sat up straight and said, I think you are out of energy for tonight, but let me leave you with one thought. You can go to sleep and never think again of what we have discussed. You can go right back into your old drama, or you can wake up tomorrow and hold on to this new idea of who you are. If you do, then you can take a next step in the process, which is to look closely at all the other things that have happened to you since birth. If you view your life as one story, from birth to right now, you will be able to see how you have been working on this question all along. You will be able to see how you came to be here in Peru and what you should do next. I nodded and looked at him closely. His eyes were warm and caring and held the same expression I had seen so often on Will's face and Sanchez's. Good night, Father Cole said, and walked into the bedroom and closed the door. I unrolled my sleeping bag on the floor and fell quickly to sleep. I woke up with Will on my mind. I wanted to ask Father Cole what else he knew of Will's plan. As I lay there thinking, still zipped in the sleeping bag, Father Cole walked into the room quietly and began rebuilding the fire. I unzipped the bag and he looked over at me, alerted by the sound. Good morning, he said. How did you sleep? Okay, I replied, standing. He put fresh kindling on the coal and then larger pieces of firewood. What did Will say he was going to do? I asked. Father Cole stood and faced me. He said he was going to a friend's house to wait for some information he expected. Apparently information about the ninth insight. What else did he say? I asked. Will told me that he thought Father Sebastian intends to find the last insight himself and seemed to be close. Will thinks that the person who controls the last insight will determine whether the manuscript ever becomes widely distributed and understood. Why? I am not sure really. Will was one of the first to ever collect and read the insights. He may understand them better than any man alive. He feels, I think, that the last insight will make all the others become more clear and accepted. Do you think he is right? I asked. I don't know, he replied. I don't understand as much as he does. All I understand is what I am supposed to do. What is that? He paused momentarily, then replied, as I said before, my truth is to help people discover who they really are. Then I read the manuscript. This mission became clear to me. The sixth insight is my special insight. My truth is helping others grasp this insight, and I am effective because I have gone through the process myself. What was your control drama? I asked. He looked at me with amusement. I was an interrogator. He controlled people by finding something wrong with the way they live their lives. That is right. My father was a poor me, and my mother was aloof. They completely ignored me. The only way I could get any attention energy was to pray into what they were doing and then point out something wrong with it. And when did you work through this drama? About 18 months ago, when I met Father Satches and began to study the manuscript. After I really looked at my parents, I realized what my experience with them was preparing me to do. You see, my father stood for accomplishment. He was very goal-oriented. He planned his time to the minute and judged himself according to how much he got done. My mother was very intuitive and mystical. She believes that each of us received spiritual guidance and that life was about following this direction. What did your father think about that? He thought it was crazy. I smiled but said nothing. Can you see where that left me? Father Cole asked. I shook my head. I couldn't quite grasp it. Because of my father, he said. I was sensitized to the idea that life was about accomplishment, having something important to do and getting it done. But at the same time, my mother was there to tell me life was about inner direction and intuitive guidance of some sort. I realized that my life was a synthesis of both viewpoints. I was trying to discover how we are guided inwardly toward the mission only we can do, knowing it is of supreme importance to pursue this mission if we are to feel happy and fulfilled. I nodded and he continued. You can see why I was excited about sixth insight. As soon as I read it, I know that my work was to help people get clear so that they could develop this sense of purpose. Do you know how Will got on the path he is on? Yes, he shared some of his information with me. Will's drama was to be aloof like yours. Also, as in your case, each of his parents was an interrogator and each had a strong philosophy they wanted Will to adopt. Will's father was a German novelist who argued that the ultimate destiny of the human race was to perfect itself. His father never advocated anything but the purest of humanitarian principles, but the Nazis used his basic idea of perfection to help legitimate their murderous liquidation of inferior races. The corruption of his theme destroyed the old man and led him to move to South America with his wife and Will. His wife was a Peruvian who grew up in America and was educated there. She was a writer too, but she was basically Eastern in her philosophical beliefs. She held that life was about reaching an inner enlightenment, a higher consciousness marked by peace of mind and detachment from the things of the world. According to her, life was not about perfection, it was about letting go of the need to perfect anything, to go anywhere. Can you see where this left Will? I shook my head. He was left. Father Carl continued in a difficult position. His father championed the Western idea of working for progress and perfection, and his mother held the Eastern belief that life was only about reaching inner peace, nothing else. These two people had prepared Will to work on integrating the main philosophical differences between Eastern and Western culture. Although he didn't know it at first, he first became an engineer dedicated to progress and then a simple guide who sought peace by bringing people to the beautiful, inwardly moving places in this country. But searching out the manuscript awakened all this in him. The insight speak directly to his main question. They reveal that the thought of both East and West can indeed be integrated into higher truth. They show us that the West is correct in maintaining that life is about progress, about evolving toward something higher. Yet the East is also correct in emphasizing that we must let go of control with the ego. We cannot progress by using logic alone. We have to attain a fuller consciousness, an inner connection with God, because only then your evolution toward something better be guided by a higher part of ourselves. When Will began to discover the insights, his whole life began to flow. He met Jose, the priest, who first found the manuscript and had it translated. Soon after that, he met the owner of Vicente and helped start the research there. And at about the same time, he met Julia, who was in business but was also guiding people to the virgin forests. It was with Julia that Will had the most affinity. They hit it off immediately because of the similarity in the questions they pursued. Julia grew up with a father who talked of spiritual ideas but in a capricious and flaky way. Her mother, on the other hand, was a college speech teacher, a debater who demanded clear thinking. Naturally, Julia found herself wanting information about spirituality, but insisting that it be intelligible and precise. Will wanted a synthesis between East and West that explained human spirituality, and Julia wanted this explanation to be perfectly clear, something the manuscript was providing for both. Breakfast is ready, Sanchez called from the kitchen. I turned around, surprised. I didn't realize Sanchez was up. Without pursuing the conversation any further, Father called and I got up and joined Sanchez in a meal of fruit and cereal. Afterwards, Father called asked me to take a walk to the ruin with him. I agreed, wanting very much to go there again. Both of us looked at Father Sanchez and he gracefully declined, explaining that he needed to drive down the mountain and make some phone calls. Outside, the sky was crystal clear and the sun shone brightly over the peaks. We walked briskly. Do you think there is a way to contact Will? I asked. No, he replied. He did not tell me who his friends were. The only way could be to drive to Iquitos, a town near the northern border, and I think that might be unsafe right now. Why there? I asked. He said he thought his search would take him to this town. There are many ruins near there. Also Cardinal Sebastian has a mission nearby. Do you think we'll find the last insight? I don't know. We walked in silence for several minutes. Then Father Cole asked, have you made a decision about what course to take personally? What do you mean? Father Sanchez said, you were talking at first about going back immediately to the United States, but that lately you seemed to be more interested in exploring the insides. How are you feeling now? Precarious, I said, but for some reason I also want to continue. I understand a man was killed right beside you. That is right. And still you want to stay? No, I said, I want to get away. Save my life. Yet here I am. Why do you think that is? He asked. I scrutinized his expression. I don't know. Do you? Do you remember where we left our conversation last night? I remembered exactly. We had discovered the question my parents left me with. To find a spirituality that is self-enhancing, that gives one a sense of adventure and fulfillment. And you said, if I looked closely at how my life has evolved, this question would put my life in perspective and clear up what is happening to me now. He smiled mysteriously. Yes, according to the manuscript, it will. How does that occur? Each of us must look at the significant turns in our lives and reinterpret them in light of our evolutionary question. I shook my head, not comprehending. Tried to perceive the sequence of interests, important friends, coincidences that have occurred in your life. Weren't they leading you somewhere? I thought about my life since childhood, but could find no pattern. How did you spend your time as you grew up? He asked. I don't know. I was a typical child, I guess. I read a lot. What did you read? Mystery stuff mostly, science fiction, ghost stories, that kind of thing. What happened in your life after that? I thought about the effect my grandfather had on me and told Father Cole about the lake and the mountains. He nodded his head knowingly. After you grew up, what happened? I went away to college. My grandfather died while I was away. What did you study at college? Sociology. Why? I met a professor I liked. His knowledge of human nature interested me. I decided to study with him. What happened then? I graduated and went to work. Did you enjoy it? Yes, for a long time. Then things changed. I felt that what I was doing was incomplete. I was working with emotionally disturbed adolescents and I thought I knew how they could transcend their past and stop the acting out. That was so self-defeating. I thought I could help them go on with their lives. I finally realized something was missing in my approach. Then what? I quit. And then an old friend called and told me of the manuscript. Is that when you decided to come to Peru? Yes. What do you think of your experience here? I think I am crazy, I said. I think I am going to get myself killed. But what do you think of the way your experience has progressed? I don't understand. When Father Sanchez told me what had happened to you since coming to Peru, he said, I was amazed at the series of coincidences that brought you face to face with the different insights of the manuscript just when you needed them. What do you think that means? I asked. He stopped walking and faced me. It means you were ready. You are like the rest of us here. You came to the point where you needed the manuscript in order to continue your life evolution. Think about how the event of your life fit together. From the beginning, you were interested in mysterious topics, and that interest finally led you to study human nature. Why do you think you happened to meet that particular teacher? He crystallized your interests and led you into looking at the greatest mystery, the human situation. on this planet, the question of what life is about. Then on some level, you know that life's meaning was connected to the problem of transcending our past conditioning and moving our lives forward. That is why you were working with those kids. But as you can understand now, it has taken the insight to clear up what was missing in your technique with those youths. In order of emotionally disturbed children to evolve, they have to do what we all have to do: get connected with enough energy to see through their intense control drama, what you call acting out, and go forward in what turns out to be a spiritual process, a process you have been trying to understand all along. See the higher perspective on these events, all the interests that led you forward in your past. All these stages of growth were just preparing you to be here now, exploring the insight. You have been working on your evolutionary search for a self-enhancing spirituality throughout your entire life. And the energy you acquired from that natural spot where you grew up, an energy your grandfather was trying to showing you, finally gave you the courage to come to Peru. You are here because this is where you need to be to continue the evolution. Your whole life has been a long road leading directly to this moment. He smiled. When you fully integrate this view of your life, you will have achieving what the manuscript calls a clear awareness of your spiritual path. According to the manuscript, we all must spend as much time as necessary going through this progress of clearing your past. Most of us having a control drama we have to transcend, but once we do, we can comprehend the higher meaning for why we were born to our particular parents and what all the twists and turns of our lives were preparing us to do. We all have a spiritual purpose, a mission that we have been pursuing without being fully aware of it. And once we bring it completely into consciousness, our lives can take off. In your case, you have discovered this purpose now. You must go forward, allowing the coincidences to lead you into a clearer and clearer idea of how to pursue this mission from this point on. What else you must do here? Since you have been in Peru, you have been riding along on Will's energy and Father Satch's. But now it is time to learn to evolve by yourself, consciously. He was about to tell me something more, but we were both distracted by the sight of Satch's truck racing up behind us. He pulled alongside and rolled down his window. What is wrong? Father Cole asked. I must return to the mission as soon as I can get packed, Satch said. Government troops are there and Cardinal Sebastian. We both jumped into the truck and Satch drove back toward Father Cole's house, telling us along the way that the troops were at his mission to confiscate all copies of the manuscript and possibly to close it down. We drove up to Father Carl's house and hurriedly walked inside. Father Satch immediately began to pack his belongings. I stood there, deliberating on what to do. As I watched Father Carl approaching the other priest and said, I think I should go with you. Satch turned. Are you sure? Yes, I believe I should. For what purpose? I don't know yet. Satch stared at him for a moment, then returned to packing. If you think that is best. I was leaning against the door frame. What should I do? I asked. Both men looked at me. That is up to you, Father Cole said. I just stared. You will have to make the decision, Satch interjected. I couldn't believe they were so detached about my choice. To go with them meant certain capture by the Peruvian troops. Yet how could I say and stay here alone? Look, I said, I don't know what to do. You two must help me. Is there anyone else who can hide me? Both men looked at one another. I don't think so, Father Cole said. I looked at them. a note of anxiety growing in my stomach. Father Cole smiled at me and said, "Stay centered. Remember who you are." Satches walked over to a bag and pulled out a folder. "This is a copy of the Sixth Insight," he said. "Perhaps it will help you decide what to do." As I took the copy, Satches looked at Father Cole and asked, "How long before you can leave?" "I will need to contact some people," Father Cole said. "Probably an hour." Satches looked at me. "Read and think for a while, then we will talk." Both men returned to their preparations, and I walked outside and sat down on a large rock, then opened the manuscript. It echoed exactly the words of Father Satches and Father Cole. Clearing the past was a precise process of becoming aware of our individual way of controlling learned in childhood. And once we could transcend this habit, it said, we would find our higher selves, our evolutionary identities. I read the entire text in less than 30 minutes, and when I finished, I finally understood the basic insight. Before we could fully enter the special state of mind that so many people were glimpsing, the experience of ourselves moving toward in life, guiding by mysterious coincidences, we had to wake up to who we really were. At that moment, Father Cole walked around the house, spotted me, and came to where I was sitting. "Have you finished?" he asked. His manner was warm and friendly as usual. "Yes. Do you mind if I sat here and you for a moment?" "I wish you would." He positioned himself on my right, and after a period of silence asked, "Do you understand that you are on your path of discovery here?" "I guess, but now what?" "Now you must really believe it." "How?" "When I feel this afraid, you must understand what is at stake. The truth you are pursuing is as important as the evolution of the universe itself, for it enabled evolution to continue. Don't you see? Father Satches told me of your vision of evolution on the ridge top. You saw how matter evolved from the simple vibration of hydrogen all the way to mankind. You wondered how humans carried on this evolution. You have now discovered the answer. Humans are born into their historical situations and find something to stand for. They form a union with another human being who also has found some purpose. The children born to this union then reconcile these two positions by pursuing a higher synthesis, guided by the coincidences. As I am sure you learned in the fifth insight, each time we fill up with energy and a coincidence occurs to lead us forward in our lives, we institute this level of energy in ourselves, and so we can exist at a higher vibration. Our children take our level of vibration and raise it even higher. This is how we, as humans, continue evolution. The difference now with this generation is that we are ready to do it consciously and to accelerate the process. No matter how afraid you become, you now have no choice. Once you learn what life is about, there is no way to erase to know. If you try to do something else with your life, you will always sense that you are missing something. But what do I do now? I don't know. Only you know that. But I suggested you first try to gain some energy. Father Satches rounded the corner of the house and joined us, carefully avoiding eye contact or noise, as if he decided not to interrupt. I tried to center myself and I focused on the rock peaks that encircled the house. I took a deep breath and realized that I had been totally self-absorbed since coming outside, as if I had had tunnel vision. I had cut myself off from the beauty and majesty of the mountains. As I gazed out at the surroundings, consciously trying to appreciate what I was seeing, I began to experience that now familiar feeling of closeness suddenly Everything seemed to exhibit more presence and to glow slightly. I began to feel lighter, my body more buoyant. I looked at Father Satches and then at Father Cole. They were gazing intensely at me, and I could tell they were observing my energy field. How do I look? I asked. You look as if you feel better, Satches said. Stay here and increase your energy as much as possible. We have about 20 more minutes of packing. He smiled wearily. After that, he continued. You will be ready to begin.